He could have chosen any woman in that room. He had money-land power, and every elegant, well-dressed woman in Silver Creek knew it. But Nathaniel Brooks stood up from his chair, set down his whiskey, and walked slowly, deliberately past all of them. The music stopped. Conversations died. Every eye followed him across that harvest hall until he stopped in front of one woman. The poorest woman in the room, the one nobody had looked at twice. He reached out his hand. "I choose you tonight, Clara Bennett. Not them. You." Clara felt the whole world hold its breath. So did Silver Creek. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this love story travels. The harvest gathering at Silver Creek had been planned for weeks. Margaret Hale, who organized the annual event with the precision of a military general and the self-importance of a crowned queen, had spent the better part of October arranging the long oak tables, selecting the musicians, and personally approving the guest list. She believed that community events were mirrors, and what Silver Creek reflected in those mirrors mattered enormously to the kind of town she intended it to be. The kind of town where wealth sat at the head of the table. The kind of town where bloodlines determined respect. The kind of town where a woman like Clara Bennett would be permitted to attend, but only because turning her away would have looked cruel, and cruelty, at least the visible kind, was considered poor manners. Clara had known walking through that door exactly what kind of room she was entering. She had dressed carefully. Not because she had much to dress in. The blue cotton dress she wore was 2 years old and had been let out twice at the seams, but because she understood that when a woman had nothing else, she carried herself. That was what her mother had told her. You can't always control what people think of you, but you can control whether you give them the satisfaction of watching you shrink. Clara Bennett did not shrink. She walked in, found a place near the edge of the room where the lamplight didn't quite reach, and accepted a glass of cider from a young server who smiled at her with the kind of uncomplicated warmth that reminded her why she had chosen to spend her life teaching children rather than managing adults. She had no intention of staying long. She had told herself an hour, maybe 2. Long enough to show her face to demonstrate that the rumors Victoria Hale had been spreading about her, that she was proud antisocial, that she thought herself too good for Silver Creek's company, were exactly that. Rumors. Then she would go home to her small rented cabin, light the stove grate, the arithmetic papers sitting on her kitchen table, and be in bed before 9. That had been her plan. Plans had a way of unraveling in Silver Creek. Nathaniel Brooks arrived at the harvest gathering 40 minutes late, which was exactly as late as a man of his position could arrive without it being considered an insult, and not a single minute later. He had timed it that way, though he would never have admitted it. He disliked these events, had disliked them for years. But John Petty, his ranch foreman and the closest thing he had to a friend, had told him plainly 3 days ago that if he skipped the harvest gathering again, people would start wondering if he was sick, and wondering men asked questions, and questions had a way of becoming problems. Nathaniel had enough problems without adding more. He was dressed in his best jacket, dark wool clean collar boots that had actually seen a brush that morning, and he stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds before the room shifted. Not dramatically, not like a wave, more like a subtle rearrangement of attention, the way a room full of people adjusts without quite acknowledging that it's adjusting. Conversations didn't stop. Music kept playing, but heads tilted, eyes moved. And within 30 seconds, 3 separate women had angled themselves into his peripheral line of sight with the practiced casualness of people who had been rehearsing the maneuver for days. Victoria Hale was the most obvious. She was standing near the center of the room in a green dress that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent, and she turned toward him with a smile that was warm in the way that a well-maintained parlor is warm, every element designed, nothing accidental. "Nathaniel," she said as he made his way through the crowd toward the drinks table. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to spend the evening with your cattle instead." "Cattle are better company," he said. She laughed as though he'd made a joke. He hadn't. Victoria Hale was not a bad person, Nathaniel supposed. She was practical, ambitious. She came from one of the 3 founding families of Silver Creek, had managed her late husband's grain business with enough competence to double its value, and had made it quietly but unmistakably clear over the past year that she considered herself an appropriate match for a man in Nathaniel's position. Position. That word kept coming up. Everyone in Silver Creek thought in terms of positions. Who occupied what rank? Who deserved what pairing? Who was meant for whom, according to the logic of land and money and family name? Nathaniel had grown up in that logic, had lived inside it for most of his life, had married inside it once, and had watched that marriage produce two polite, unhappy people who were very good at sitting across a dinner table from each other and very bad at everything else. Eleanor had died 4 years ago, and Nathaniel had grieved her, not because he had loved her the way a man was supposed to love a wife, but because she had deserved better than what their marriage had been, and he had never figured out how to give it to her, and now it was too late. He thought about that more than he let on. "Are you planning to dance tonight?" Victoria was asking. "No," he said. "Nathaniel, I don't dance, Victoria." She tilted her head slightly. The smile held. "You used to. A long time ago." He took his drink and moved toward the far side of the room, which was his standard strategy. At these events, find a wall, put his back against it, and wait until enough time had passed that his departure would be considered reasonable rather than rude. It was from that position, 20 minutes later, that he first heard her. Shout. He didn't see her before he heard her. That was the thing he remembered afterward, when he turned it over in his mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. He heard her voice first. She was talking to one of the younger teachers, a woman named Ruth, who had apparently been relating some distressing incident involving a student's father and a disputed homework assignment. Nathaniel wasn't paying close attention. He had positioned himself near a conversation he had no intention of joining, which was a social maneuver he had perfected over decades, until he heard Clara's response cut through the ambient noise of the room. "And what did you tell him?" Ruth's voice quieter. "I said I would reconsider the grade." A pause. Then, "Ruth." The voice was clear and unhurried, and there was something in it that was neither sharp nor soft, something more like iron that had been worn smooth. "You don't reconsider a grade because a parent made you uncomfortable. You reconsider a grade when you've made an error. Did you make an error?" "Well, no, but he was very..." Persistent people are not automatically right. You are that child's teacher. That means something. Don't hand it back the moment someone pushes on it. Nathaniel turned just slightly so he could see who was speaking. Clara Bennett was not what he expected. He had seen her before, in the vague, unexamined way that a man sees people who occupy the edges of his world. He knew she taught at the schoolhouse outside his eastern boundary. He knew she rented the Gallagher cabin, which was small and drafty, and had a roof that needed attending to. He had noticed the gap in the cedar shingles last spring, and had told himself he would have someone look at it, and then had not followed through on this, which was the kind of minor negligence he occasionally felt guilty about at odd hours of the night. He had not known she looked like this. Not beautiful in the way Victoria Hale was beautiful, arranged, deliberate, constructed for effect. Clara Bennett looked like someone who had better things to do than be looked at. Her dark hair was pinned up with a practicality that suggested she had done it herself in under 5 minutes. Her blue dress was clean and well kept, but showed its age. She held her cider glass the way she held her ground, without any particular self-consciousness, as though it had simply never occurred to her to be apologetic about existing, and she was, he thought, the only person in this room having a genuine conversation. He watched her for 3 minutes. Then John Petty appeared at his elbow, because John Petty always materialized at the exact moment when Nathaniel was thinking something inconvenient. "You're staring," John said. "I'm observing." "That's the school teacher, Clara Bennett. I know who she is. Do you?" It wasn't a question. John had a talent for turning statements into interrogations by removing the inflection. "Because from over here it looks like you just noticed." Nathaniel said nothing. John was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's not going to notice you staring at her from across the room, Nate." "I'm not trying to be noticed." "Then what are you trying to do?" Nathaniel picked up his drink. "Figure something out. he said. Meg. The moment everything changed happened 40 minutes later and began with Charles Whitmore. Whitmore had arrived in Silver Creek 6 months ago with money from back east and opinions about everything. He had purchased the old Decker property on the western side of town, which bordered Nathaniel's land, in a way that made Nathaniel's lawyers uncomfortable, and he had spent the intervening months making the kind of social moves that signaled he intended to be significant in this town whether or not the town wanted him. He was the kind of man who talked loudly and laughed at his own jokes and used the word naturally to begin sentences that contained things other people would have had the decency to keep to themselves. Nathaniel had disliked him on sight. Tonight Whitmore was holding court near the refreshment table, and he had apparently been entertaining his small audience for some time because they had the glazed, obligated laughter of people who had been laughing at the same man's stories for too long. Nathaniel wasn't paying close attention until he heard his own name. Brooks keeps half of Silver Creek employed naturally, which is why people tolerate his moods. Whitmore chuckled. A man can afford any disposition when he owns that much land. The people around him murmured agreement. Of course. Whitmore continued warming to the room's response in the way that certain men do, expanding into attention the way bread expands in heat. The question is, what he does with it all. Man like that should have a wife, someone to manage the social end of things. Can't very well build a legacy without an heir. More murmurs. My money, Whitmore said with the tone of someone about to make a pronouncement they'd been saving up, is on the Hale woman, Victoria. Makes sense, doesn't it? Combines two of the biggest land holdings in the territory. That's just good economics. He paused for effect. Though I suppose he could do worse than look at one of the younger women if he wanted. I'd be careful about finishing that thought in mixed company, Clara Bennett said. The murmur stopped. Nathaniel, who had been calculating whether he could leave the gathering without passing Whitmore's orbit, went completely still. Clara was not looking at Whitmore with anger. That was the first thing. She was looking at him with a kind of quiet level steadiness that was somehow more unnerving than anger would have been, because it suggested that she had examined him and found him less troubling than inconvenient. I beg your pardon, Whitmore said. You're discussing a man's personal life as though it's a public investment strategy, Clara said. And doing it loudly enough that half the room can hear you. I'm just suggesting you might want to finish your thought somewhere less crowded. The small silence that followed had texture to it. Whitmore laughed, but it landed wrong. And who are you exactly to offer that kind of suggestion? Clara Bennett. I teach at the schoolhouse on Brooks' east boundary. She paused. The children are 7 years old, and they know not to discuss other people's business at the dinner table. I mention that in case it's useful. Someone behind Nathaniel made a sound that might have been a swallowed laugh. Whitmore's face cycled through several colors. Well, he said finally, with the forced pleasantness of a man who has been outmaneuvered and is determined not to acknowledge it. An opinion for every occasion. Apparently, Clara said. She turned back to Ruth, who was looking at her with an expression somewhere between admiration and terror, and resumed the conversation as though the interruption hadn't happened. Nathaniel set down his glass. He walked across the room. He did not plan it. He would think about that later, how there was no decision exactly, no moment of calculation. Just the simple mechanical fact of his feet moving in her direction, because standing still had become the less logical option. He was standing behind her left shoulder when she sensed him, because Clara Bennett turned around before he had a chance to say anything, which was, he would discover, typical. She looked at him. He was 3 inches taller than her, and she did not adjust for that. The way most women adjusted for him, there was no subtle shift of posture, no recalibration of expression. She looked at him the way she had looked at Whitmore directly without performance. Mr. Brooks, she said. Miss Bennett. A beat. He was aware that half the room was watching this exchange without appearing to watch it, which was a social skill Silver Creek had collectively mastered. I want to apologize, he said. She blinked. Just once. For what? The roof on the Gallagher cabin. I noticed the shingles last spring. I should have had someone come out before the cold season. For a moment she just looked at him, and he had the distinct sensation that she was deciding something not about the roof, but about him, about whether he was worth the energy of a genuine response. "The cabin is fine," she said. "I put a pot under it." "That's not... It's temporary. I manage." She paused. "Thank you for mentioning it." The thank you was not warm exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was the thank you of someone who appreciated the acknowledgement but didn't intend to make more of it than it was. Nathaniel stood there. He was not accustomed to not knowing what to say next. "What you said to Whitmore," he started. "Don't thank me for that either," she said. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because he was being rude and I was standing close enough to say something." "I wasn't going to thank you." She looked at him again, recalibrating. "Then what were you going to say?" "I was going to say it was accurate." He paused. "He does talk about people's lives like they're investment portfolios." Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite a smile, more the precursor to one the moment before the weather changes. "He does," she agreed. "And he's usually wrong about the economics too," Nathaniel said. This time she did smile. Brief, involuntary, real. The kind of smile that happened before someone decided whether they meant to smile. Ruth, who had been watching this exchange with the transfixed attention of someone watching a weather event, suddenly remembered she had somewhere to be and excused herself with a speed that bordered on comic. Nathaniel looked at the empty space where Ruth had been. "She thinks I'm frightening," he said. "You are a little frightening," Clara said. "You come in here and put your back against the wall and look at everyone like you're deciding whether they're worth your time." He was quiet for a moment. "And am I doing that now?" "No," she said. "Right now you're doing something different." "What am I doing?" She considered him. "You're actually talking to someone." They talked for an hour. He did not plan an hour. He was not in general a man who planned conversations because conversations had always been things he endured rather than pursued. But somehow the minutes kept accumulating and he kept not leaving, and she kept saying things that required responses. And before he understood what had happened, it was past 9 o'clock, and the musicians had shifted from lively reels to quieter pieces, and half the room had thinned out, and he and Clara Bennett were still standing in the same corner, talking about, of all things, mathematics. It had started with something she'd said about her students, about a boy named Thomas who was 9 years old and could multiply faster than most adults, but was convinced he was stupid because he struggled with his letters, and how the school board's solution had been to suggest she spend less time on arithmetic and more on reading, which had infuriated her. "Reading matters," she said. "Of course it matters. But so does the way a child understands his own mind. Thomas is not stupid. Thomas thinks in numbers. You don't fix that by taking away the thing that makes him feel capable." "What did you tell the board?" "I told them I would increase reading practice and maintain the arithmetic hours." "That's not what they asked for." "No," she said. "It wasn't." He looked at her. "And if they push back, they'll push back. People always push back on things that make sense." She said it without bitterness, just as a statement of observable fact. "I'll manage." He believed her. That was the strange thing. He had spent years surrounded by people who made declarations about what they intended to do and then made excuses when those intentions met resistance. Clara Bennett did not sound like someone who made excuses. She sounded like someone who had already calculated the resistance and factored it in. "You're not from here originally," he said. It wasn't a question. "Indiana," she said. "Small town, not unlike this one. Family." A pause, brief but perceptible. "My mother passed 3 years ago. I don't have siblings." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She said it simply, without the practiced modesty that people sometimes use to deflect condolence. "What about you?" "You didn't grow up here either." "Wyoming," he said. "My father had a small spread outside Laramie. I came to Montana when I was 22. With nothing." He almost smiled. "With very little. And built all of this, over a long time, with a lot of help I didn't always deserve." She looked at him then, and it was the look he would remember later, because it was different from the way most people looked at him. Most people looked at him and saw the ranch, the land, the money. She looked at him and seemed to be looking at the sentence itself. What he had just said, turning it over. "That's an honest thing to say," she said finally. "Most people don't say it. Most people don't think it." He met her eyes. "What about you? What about me? Did you get help you didn't deserve?" She was quiet for a moment. "I got less help than I did deserve," she said. "For a long time." She paused. "But I don't say that to complain. I'm just answering the question." Before he could respond, Victoria Hale materialized at his side with the smooth inevitability of someone who had been waiting for a gap. "Nathaniel." Her voice was pleasant, modulated. "I've been monopolized all evening. I was hoping you might save the last dance." He turned to look at her, then very briefly back at Clara. Clara's expression had closed again. Professional, polite. She had taken a half-step back, creating space with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to making room for other people. "I told you earlier," Nathaniel said to Victoria. "I don't dance. You also said you wouldn't come tonight, and here you are." Victoria smiled at Clara with the particular brightness of a woman who is being territorial in the nicest possible way. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Victoria Hale." "Clara Bennett," Clara said. Her voice was even, unbothered. "I teach at the schoolhouse on the east boundary." "Of course," Victoria said with the tone of someone who had known this and was choosing to process it gently. "How lovely." "Excuse me," Clara said. She looked at Nathaniel once, a look that was neither warm nor cold, just direct, as though she wanted to make sure there was no confusion about the fact that she was leaving by her own choice rather than being driven out. "Good night, Mr. Brooks." "Good night, Miss Bennett." She walked toward the door, and she didn't look back. And Nathaniel watched her go with the specific, unmistakable sensation of a man who has just made a mistake he can't immediately identify. Victoria was talking. She was saying something about the harvest yields, about a mutual acquaintance's new house, about a dinner she intended to host in November. Nathaniel was giving her the appropriate portion of his attention, nodding at intervals, responding at appropriate moments, while the larger part of his mind was doing something else entirely. He was thinking about what Clara had said. Most people don't think it. Most people in his life told him what they thought he wanted to hear. His accountants framed bad news in optimistic language. His hands complimented his decisions, and then quietly corrected them in execution. The women who had maneuvered for his attention over the past 4 years had uniformly agreed with everything he said, which had always struck him as an unsustainable long-term strategy. Clara Bennett had disagreed with him 3 separate times in the last hour. Calmly, without apology. On things she'd had reasons for, which she had explained when he asked. It had been the most interesting conversation he'd had in a very long time. "Nathaniel." He realized Victoria had asked him something. "I'm sorry," he said. "What was that?" She studied him for a moment with the precise, practiced expression of a woman taking inventory. "I asked if you were planning to attend Reverend Morris's gathering next week." "I hadn't thought about it." "You should come," she said. "It would be good for people to see you engaged with the community, especially given—" She paused, choosing words. "Given the discussions that have been happening about the land boundary. Having allies matters, Nathaniel. You know that." He knew that. He also knew that Victoria wasn't wrong. The land dispute with Whitmore was not going to resolve itself, and it was going to require more than his lawyers if Whitmore had the backers he appeared to have. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good." She smiled. The warm parlor smile. "Now will you at least walk me to the door? It's late, and I don't like crossing the square alone." He offered her his arm, because that was what a man in his position did, and walked her to the door and said the appropriate things, and then stood in the cold night air outside the hall, watching her carriage pull away. Then he stood there for another moment. The Gallagher cabin was about a half-mile east, just past the tree line. He was not going to walk in that direction. He walked back toward the hall, collected his coat and hat, said brief and sufficient goodbyes to two men who tried to engage him in conversations about cattle prices, and left. He rode home under a sky so full of stars it seemed almost unreasonably generous, and he thought about a woman who thanked people simply and directly, and didn't make more of things than they were. He thought about her for a long time. 2 days later, he found a reason to ride out to the east boundary. He told himself it was the fencing. The east fence line had been needing inspection since September, and he had a post rider doing the south section anyway, and it made logistical sense to check the east himself. This was true. The east fence did need inspection. He inspected it. He also, at approximately 10:30 in the morning, came to a stop near the schoolhouse, which was a small wooden structure set back about 40 feet from the road, and where he could hear very clearly, through the single open window, a lesson in progress. If a rancher has 40 head of cattle, Clara was saying, and sells 12 in the fall and 6 more are lost to weather, how many does he have going into spring? A beat. Multiple voices calculating. A boy's voice, 22. Good. Thomas. Now the rancher wants to buy back his lost cattle before the next season. If each head costs $3.75, how much does he need? Silence longer this time. Then tentatively, $22.50. Check your work, she said, not harshly, with the particular patience of someone who knew the answer would come if she gave it room. A longer pause. Then with more confidence, $22.50. Correct. Her voice carried something that wasn't praise exactly, it was quieter than praise, more like recognition. Good thinking. Nathaniel sat on his horse outside that schoolhouse for approximately 3 minutes before he realized he was doing it and made himself ride on. He fixed the east fence post that was leaning and was back at the main house by noon. John Petty was waiting for him at the barn. "East fence look all right?" John asked. "Mostly," Nathaniel said. "There's a post that needed setting." John took his horse's bridle and gave him the look that meant he knew something was being left out. "Nice morning for a ride," John said. "Yes." "Quiet out by the east boundary." "Mostly," Nathaniel said again. John made a sound that was not quite a comment and led the horse inside, and Nathaniel walked to the house and refused on principle to feel observed. He came back the following Thursday. This time he told himself it was because one of the widows along the East Road, Mrs. Calloway, had mentioned at the harvest gathering that her water pump had been giving trouble, and he had intended to send someone to look at it. He sent himself. The pump took 40 minutes to fix. The schoolhouse was visible from Mrs. Calloway's front yard. He was replacing the pump handle when he heard the school bell ring and the controlled eruption of children released, and he watched again. Not planned, just the natural trajectory of a man's eyes when sound and motion occur in his field of vision as the children filed out in their various directions. And then Clara came out. She stood on the small step outside the schoolhouse door with a ledger under one arm, shading her eyes with the other hand, looking out at the road with the expression of someone making a practical assessment of something. Weather, maybe, or distance. She saw him at the same moment he became aware that he had been watching her. They were 60 feet apart. She tilted her head slightly, lifted her free hand in a brief, uncomplicated wave. He lifted his in return, and then she went back inside, and he went back to the pump handle, and that was all that happened, and it was somehow the most unsettling 30 seconds of his week. He asked John that evening if there were any ongoing maintenance issues with the schoolhouse. John put down his coffee cup. "The roof," Nathaniel added. "I mentioned it to Miss Bennett at the gathering. I want to make sure someone's actually been sent." "Nobody's been sent," John said, "because you only mentioned it 2 days ago." "Then send someone." John looked at him. "What?" Nathaniel said. "Nothing," John said. He picked up his coffee cup again. "I'll send Hector and Martinez out on Friday. Tell them to check the foundation too. The cabin's old." "It is that," John agreed. Nathaniel picked up the inventory report he'd been pretending to read for the past 20 minutes. "Nate, John said. What? You remember the last time you started finding excuses to ride the east boundary every few days? He kept his eyes on the report. I don't know what you're talking about. No, John said equably. I don't suppose you do. He left Nathaniel alone after that, which was either mercy or strategy, and Nathaniel stared at the inventory numbers and tried to remember what it was that kept making him lose count. It was the school board meeting that changed things. He hadn't intended to be at the school board meeting. It was held on the third Tuesday of each month in the back room of Abernethy's General Store, and Nathaniel Brooks, who owned more land than any other single person in Silver Creek, was not on the school board and had never attended one of its meetings. He was in Abernethy's for a legitimate reason, horseshoe nails and a new survey map, when he heard voices in the back room and recognized with a precision that surprised him the particular timbre of Clara Bennett's voice doing something it hadn't done when she talked to him. It was controlled. Careful. The way a person controls their voice when they're angry and have decided that showing the anger will only cost them. He paused near the back wall. Through the partially open door, he could hear a man's voice. Gerald Marsh, who ran the school board with the conviction that education was primarily a budget problem, saying, Miss Bennett, the board has reviewed the situation, and we feel the current salary arrangement doesn't reflect the community's priorities. A pause. Can you be more specific? Clara said. We're reducing your monthly stipend by 15%, effective next month. The silence that followed was short and absolute. On what basis, she said. The board has determined that the teaching load doesn't justify. My teaching load, Clara said, includes 31 children from ages 6 to 14, 3 grade levels running simultaneously. And I have taken on 2 additional students whose families cannot afford the county schooling fee which I waived without billing the board. That is not a reduced load, Mr. Marsh. That is an expanded one. Miss Bennett. If the concern is budget, I'm happy to submit a detailed account of hours and outcomes. I have records going back 8 months. I can have them to you by Friday. That won't be necessary. Her voice sharpened just slightly. Then what exactly will convince you to reconsider? A murmur among the board. Nathaniel, standing in the supply aisle, set down the survey map he'd been holding. Marsh again. The board has made its decision. We wanted to inform you in person. You wanted to inform me in person, Clara repeated, not to discuss it. We've made our decision. A longer pause. I see, she said. Her voice had gone level again, not cold, just settled, like someone who has absorbed a blow and is deciding what to do about it. Then I'd like the reasoning documented in the board minutes, and I'd like a copy. I don't see why that's... Because it's a public record, she said, and I'm entitled to it. Nathaniel walked around the back of the store and through the alley door, which brought him out 5 feet from the back room entrance. He knocked on the open door. 4 heads turned. Gerald Marsh, Tom Bickle, Frances Abernethy herself, and Clara, who saw him, and went very, very still. The way a person goes still when they're not sure whether a situation just got better or more complicated. Nathaniel, Marsh said, with the uncertain heartiness of a man who wanted to be pleased about this, but wasn't sure he should be. We didn't know you were in the store. I was buying nails, Nathaniel said. He looked around the room with the deliberate calm of a man who has learned that saying very little in a certain tone is more effective than saying a great deal. I couldn't help overhearing. Well, it's a private board matter. The school on the east boundary is on my land, Nathaniel said, which means the board's decisions about that school affect my property, which makes it in some sense my matter too. The board members exchanged the quick sideways glances of people recalculating. We're just reviewing the compensation structure, Bickle said quickly. Reducing it, Clara said. She was looking at Nathaniel, and the look was complicated. Gratitude and wariness braided together the expression of someone who has not yet decided whether she wants to be rescued or would prefer to finish this herself. He understood that. I'm curious, Nathaniel said to Marsh. How much does the board estimate it would cost to replace a teacher who's managing 31 students across 3 grade levels and waiving county fees? Silence. Because I'd imagine, he continued, that finding someone with those qualifications would cost considerably more than whatever you're currently paying. And I'd imagine the families of those 31 children would have opinions about an interruption to the school year. Marsh cleared his throat. We're not talking about replacement. Good, Nathaniel said. Then the compensation reduction seems unnecessary. He looked at Clara again. I'll let you finish your meeting. He went back to the front of the store, bought his nails and the survey map, and was nearly at the door when he heard footsteps behind him. Mr. Brooks. He turned. Clara was standing in the middle of the store, with the ledger still under her arm, and her expression was doing something more complicated than he could easily read. Thank you, she said. I think. You were handling it, he said. I was handling it, she agreed. Slowly. And they were going to say no anyway. Maybe. Definitely. But there was something in her voice that wasn't complaint. Something almost dry, like she was acknowledging a situation with both eyes open. What made you say something? He considered that. It seemed wrong, he said. Someone doing their job and being paid less for doing more of it. She looked at him for a long moment. That happens to a lot of people. I know. You don't usually intervene. No, he said. They stood there in the middle of Abernethy's general store, and the question of why he had intervened this particular time for this particular person hung between them like a thing neither of them was ready to say out loud. Hector and Martinez fixed the roof last Friday, Clara said finally. Good. The foundation is solid, apparently. Your man Martinez seemed almost disappointed. He felt the corner of his mouth move. He takes pride in finding problems. There's a leak under the kitchen floor, she offered. He's welcome to that one. I'll tell him. She nodded, started to turn, then stopped. Mr. Brooks. She was looking at him with that direct, unhurried look. Why do you ride the east fence line so often? The question landed with the gentle precision of someone who had been waiting to ask it and had decided the moment was right. He held her gaze. It needs inspection, he said. Every 3 days. A pause. It's a long fence, he said. And Clara Bennett looked at him, and her expression did the thing again, the precursor to a smile, the moment before the weather changed, and she said very quietly, Good night, Mr. Brooks. Good night, Miss Bennett. She walked out the door, and Nathaniel stood in the middle of Abernethy's general store, holding horseshoe nails and a survey map, understanding for the first time in a very long while exactly why he'd been riding that fence. The kitchen leak turned out to be worse than Clara had let on. Martinez came back on Monday morning, crouched under the floorboards for 20 minutes, and emerged with the expression of a man who had found exactly what he'd been hoping for, and also exactly what Clara had been dreading. The subfloor joist on the northwest corner was rotted through. Had been rotting, he told her, for probably 2 seasons. Whatever she'd been putting under it to catch the drip had slowed the visible damage, but done nothing about the structural problem underneath. It's not dangerous yet, he told her carefully, but it will be by spring. How much? She asked. He gave her a number. She looked at it the way people look at things that are true and unwelcome at the same time, and then she thanked him and told him she'd think about it. And after he left, she stood in her kitchen for a long moment, doing the arithmetic she already knew the answer to. The school board had followed through on the salary reduction. 15% documented in the minutes she'd requested, which had arrived in a sealed envelope with no accompanying note. She had read the minutes once, folded them precisely, and put them in the back of her ledger, where she kept things she hadn't decided what to do with yet. The numbers didn't work. They didn't work before the reduction, and they certainly didn't work now, and adding a floor repair on top of that was the kind of problem that had no solution except time and stubbornness, both of which she had in reasonable supply. What she did not have was any intention of mentioning it to Nathaniel Brooks. She was aware, had been aware since the moment he'd walked through the door at Abernethy's, and said what he'd said, that she was standing on a particular kind of edge. The kind that looked from certain angles like gratitude, and from others looked like dependency. She had spent enough of her life being helped by people who expected something in return to be careful about the difference. Nathaniel hadn't asked for anything. That was in its own way the most unsettling thing about him. She graded her papers that evening with the particular focus of a woman who is refusing to think about something specific, and she was mostly successful until she heard horses in the yard and looked up to find through the window Hector and Martinez unloading timber from a cart. She was outside before she'd consciously decided to go. "What is this?" she said. Hector Older, steady the kind of man who executed instructions without elaborating on their source, set down a plank and looked at her with uncomplicated honesty. "Subfloor repair, Miss Bennett. Mr. Brooks sent us." "I didn't ask for—" "No, ma'am. He asked on your behalf." She stood there in the evening cold, looking at the timber, and felt two entirely different things at the same time. One of them was relief, which she would not have admitted out loud to anyone. The other was a sharp and specific irritation, because she had not asked and she had not been consulted, and the fact that it was genuinely needed did not change the fact that she hadn't been the one to decide. "Tell Mr. Brooks I appreciate the thought," she said, "and that I'll be reimbursing the cost of materials." Hector nodded with the look of a man who had expected exactly this response and had no intention of arguing with it. She went back inside, sat down at her kitchen table, and did the arithmetic again. The numbers still didn't work. She added a third column and started figuring out where else she could cut, because she would be reimbursing that timber, or she would not be able to look Nathaniel Brooks in the eye again. And she had decided quietly, specifically, without quite naming the reason, that being able to look him in the eye mattered to her. He came by the following afternoon. She heard him before she saw him. The particular sound of a single horse being walked, rather than ridden fast. The measured pace of someone who wasn't in a hurry and wasn't pretending to be. She was teaching when he arrived, and she did not stop teaching. And when the children left at 4 o'clock, she came out to find him sitting on the top rail of the small fence that bordered the schoolhouse yard, doing nothing in particular, which was something she was learning he was better at than most men. Most men treated stillness like a problem to be solved. Nathaniel treated it like a position. "You sent timber without asking," she said. "Martinez said the joist was rotted through. Martinez works for you. His job is to tell you things, not to. He told me because he knew I'd want to know." Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "The floor needed fixing. It's fixed. It's being fixed, and I'm paying for the materials." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She held his gaze. "I'm choosing to." Something moved in his expression, not quite surprise, but its close neighbor. The look of a man who had offered something expecting gratitude and had gotten something he respected more. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. He climbed down off the fence rail. He was close enough now that she had to look up at him, and she did it without adjusting her posture, which was she suspected something he'd noticed about her, that she didn't make herself smaller in proportion to how large the other person was. "The board isn't going to reverse the salary decision," he said. "I know. I have influence with 2 of the members, Bickle and Abernethy. If you want me to—" "No," she said. He stopped. "I mean it, Mr. Brooks." She said it without heat, clearly. "The roof I'll accept because it was already your responsibility as the property, or close enough. The timber is a loan I'm repaying, but I won't have you go back to that board on my behalf. If they see me keeping my position because of your influence, I lose something I can't get back." "You're standing with the board," he said. "My standing with myself." She paused. "I've been in rooms before where I kept my place because someone powerful spoke up for me. It always costs more than it saves. I'd rather lose the position, honestly." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "You'd rather lose it," he said. "Then keep it wrong." "Yes." He looked at her. "Most people don't think that way." "Most people haven't had to," she said simply. The afternoon was going cold and gray around them, and a wind had started picking up from the north, and neither of them moved to end the conversation. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "What do you want? Not the school, not Silver Creek. What do you actually want?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not intrusive, genuinely curious in the way that someone asks a question they don't already know the answer to. She thought about it, really thought about it, which was something she rarely gave herself permission to do, because wanting specific things had a way of making their absence more painful. "A room of my own," she said finally. "A real one, not rented, not borrowed, mine." She paused. "Work that matters. Not work that's tolerated because no one better is available." Another pause shorter. "And someone who talks to me the way you do." The last part came out quieter than she'd intended. She heard it land, and she saw him hear it, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "The way I do," he repeated. "Like I'm worth answering," she said. "Like what I say changes what you think." He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely name. It wasn't pity. It was something older and quieter than pity, the look of a man who has recognized something he'd stopped expecting to find. "It does," he said. "For what that's worth." "It's worth something," she said. And that was all either of them said about it, but it was enough, and they both knew it, and when he finally left, walking his horse back toward the main road in the gathering dusk, Clara stood in the schoolhouse doorway and allowed herself briefly to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, something sturdier than hope, more like the recognition that a thing you'd stopped believing in had turned out against all available evidence to be real. Charles Whitmore did not make his move all at once. He was smarter than that. Smarter Nathaniel had come to understand than he'd initially given him credit for, and this was a failure of assessment that he was now paying for. Whitmore had spent 3 months being charming, loud, and apparently guileless in public, which had caused Nathaniel and most of Silver Creek to underestimate what he was actually doing with his time. What he was actually doing, Nathaniel's lawyer Robert Crane informed him in a meeting on the second Friday of November, was filing a land survey dispute with the territorial office in Helena. Nathaniel sat across from Crane's desk and read the filing twice. "He's claiming the eastern boundary marker is incorrectly placed," Crane said. "According to his survey, which was conducted incidentally by a firm he brought in from Billings, rather than using the county surveyor, the actual line puts 240 acres of your eastern pasture inside his property line." "That's wrong," Nathaniel said. "Of course it's wrong. But he filed it, and now it has to be contested. And contesting it in territorial court takes time and costs money, and in the interim creates a question about the status of that land." Crane paused. "There's more." Nathaniel set the filing down. "Tell me. He's approached 3 of the smaller ranchers bordering your south line, offered to buy their land at above market value. If he acquires all 3, he controls the water access on your south watershed." Crane looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "He's been planning this for a while, Nathaniel. This is not opportunistic. This is a campaign." The room was very quiet. "How long to resolve the boundary dispute through proper channels?" Nathaniel said. 6 to 8 months if the territorial office moves efficiently. Closer to a year if he files additional challenges. "And the ranchers on the south?" 2 of them have already had preliminary conversations with his agent. The third, Willis Kane, has refused so far, but his daughter's medical debts are significant. He's vulnerable. Nathaniel stood up. "I'll go see Willis tonight. There's something else." Crane's voice was careful, the voice of a man about to deliver something he'd been weighing. "Whitmore made a comment last week, at a social call with the Pedersons. He said, and I'm told this was said with great casualness, which means it was carefully calculated that a man with Brooks' land troubles might find it advantageous to consolidate. His word. Consolidate. He suggested a business arrangement with the Hale estate might solve several problems at once." Nathaniel was very still. "He's suggesting I marry Victoria Hale." "He's suggesting the idea in public where it will circulate and become something people expect. It's a pressure strategy. If you're seen to need financial and social alliance, and the obvious candidate is Victoria, refusing her begins to look eccentric, even weak. Crane paused. He's trying to narrow your options. By controlling what the town expects from me. By controlling what the town expects from you. Crane agreed. Nathaniel picked up his hat. Let him try, he said. But riding home that night, he understood that the situation was more serious than he'd allowed himself to admit. The boundary dispute was a legal problem, and he had lawyers. The water access was a strategic problem, and he had resources. But the social pressure, the quiet accumulating expectation that he would marry to stabilize himself, that was a different kind of problem. Because it worked by consensus. It worked because enough people believed it and said so, and looked at you in a particular way, and eventually the looking became its own kind of force. He thought about what Clara had said, about keeping a position wrong. He thought about Willis Kane sitting on a South Border ranch with a sick daughter and a man from Billings making offers. He rode harder through the dark. Willis Kane was a lean, weathered man of 60 who had built his property from nothing and had opinions about accepting help from neighbors that closely resembled Clara's, which was one reason Nathaniel respected him. He made the offer simply. He would cover the medical costs, full, no debt attached. Willis could pay him back in cattle over 3 years at whatever price suited them both. Willis didn't say yes. He also didn't say no. He sat across from Nathaniel at his kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup and looked at him for a long time. Whitmore's man offered me good money, Willis said. I know. Market rate and a half, cash. I know. My daughter needs surgery before winter. Willis's voice didn't change when he said it. It was the voice of a man who has practiced saying hard things plainly. I'm not a man who lets sentiment get in the way of that. I'm not asking you to, Nathaniel said. I'm asking you to let me solve the medical problem separately from the land question. Keep them in different columns. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's fair. Nathaniel met his eyes. I'm not asking for the land, Willis. I'm not asking you to promise me anything. I'm just asking you to have the surgery scheduled before you sign anything with Whitmore. Willis looked at his hands. Why does it matter to you? He asked, not suspicious, genuinely wanting to know. You've got enough land. Whitmore coming in on the south is a problem for your water. I understand that. But you could find other water. You've got resources. I could, Nathaniel said. But the ranchers on that south line have been there for 20 years. Whitmore will develop whatever he acquires. It won't be cattle country anymore. He paused. I watched that happen in Wyoming. Somebody comes in with money and a plan buys out the small operations, and inside of a decade, everything's different. The people who built it don't live there anymore. Willis was quiet for a long time. You've changed some, he said finally, from when you first came to this territory. I've had time to, Nathaniel said. The school teacher changed you. The statement landed without warning, and Nathaniel heard it with the particular startled clarity of a man who has just heard something true, said out loud for the first time. She's good people, Willis said simply. My youngest was in her class last year. Girl came home every night with something to say about what she'd learned. First time in 2 years, schooling produced anything more than boredom. He paused. She waived our fee. I know, Nathaniel said. Does she know you know? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Willis made a sound that might have been a laugh. Well, he set down the coffee cup and stood up, and Nathaniel stood with him, and they shook hands. The way men shake hands when something has been decided, even though nothing specific has been said. I'll think on it. That's all I'm promising. That's all I'm asking. Riding home, Nathaniel turned over what Willis had said. The schoolteacher changed you. He hadn't corrected it, which was its own kind of answer, and he sat with that on the long, dark ride back to the main house, turned it over, held it up to the light. He thought about the harvest gathering, about a woman walking away from him in a room full of people who expected her to stay, about a voice coming through an open schoolhouse window telling a child to check his work, about a direct, unhurried gaze that asked nothing from him except honest answers. He had not been changed by her. That wasn't quite right. He had been reminded of something he'd understood once a long time ago, before wealth and position and grief had layered themselves over it. Something about the difference between a life that looked right from the outside and a life that felt like something from the inside. He had spent 4 years building the appearance of the first. Clara Bennett, without trying and without knowing it, had made him want the second. The confrontation came on a Wednesday, which was the most ordinary day of the week, to have everything upended. Clara was locking the schoolhouse when Whitmore's carriage came down the east road, and she knew it was his, because he had a particular matched pair of bays that he liked people to admire. The carriage stopped. He got out. He was alone, which she noted because men like Whitmore rarely went anywhere without an audience, unless they were doing something they didn't want witnessed. "Miss Bennett?" He said it with the pleasant authority of a man who has decided in advance how a conversation will go. "Glad I caught you." "Mr. Whitmore?" She kept the schoolhouse key in her hand. "What can I do for you?" He fell into step beside her as she started toward the road which she had not invited, and she did not slow her pace to accommodate him. "I wanted to speak to you," he said, "about your situation here." "My situation, your position, the school." He paused, calibrating. "I understand the board has been reviewing compensation. That can't be easy for a woman in your circumstances." "My circumstances are fine," she said. Of course, of course." The warmth in his voice was the warmth of money, smooth and self-assured and slightly impersonal. "I ask because I have an investment in this territory's future, and education is part of that. I'm considering establishing a proper school in town. Larger building, better resources, full salary. And I'd want a qualified teacher." Clara stopped walking. She turned to look at him with an expression that gave him nothing. "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm suggesting a possibility, depending on how things develop." He smiled. The smile was comfortable with itself. Of course, a position like that would depend on the school being tied to the community's growth plans, which means whoever manages it needs to be aligned with the vision for the community. "Whose vision?" she said. A small beat. "The people invested in the town's future." "You," she said. He tilted his head, conceding the point pleasantly. "Among others." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was doing the thing Nathaniel had noticed, turning something over, examining it from multiple angles before speaking. "And what," she said slowly, "would alignment mean in practice?" He spread his hands. "Generous. Reasonable. Just good judgment. Understanding the relationships that keep a community functioning. Knowing who to speak well of and when to let certain other relationships become less prominent." The air went very still between them. "You're asking me," Clara said, "to distance myself from Nathaniel Brooks." Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something in it settled into a different configuration, less warm, more precise. "I'm saying that a teacher whose association with a controversial land dispute might complicate her position in the community is a teacher who might benefit from reconsidering her associations. And if I don't reconsider them, then your current position becomes harder to maintain." He said it gently, as though the gentleness made it something other than what it was. "The board is amenable to my suggestions. It's just the nature of things, Miss Bennett. Community relationships." Clara was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Whitmore, I've had men try to arrange my loyalties before. Usually they're more subtle about it." She paused. "I appreciate the directness, actually. It makes things simpler." "Miss Bennett." "The answer is no." She looked at him steadily. "Not because of Nathaniel Brooks specifically. Because what you're describing is not employment. It's a purchase, and I don't sell." She turned and started walking again. "Good day. You might want to think carefully." She kept walking. She was 200 yards down the road when she heard the carriage move off in the other direction. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. Inside, something was shaking. Not fear exactly, but the adrenaline of a confrontation survived, and underneath it, something colder. She understood now what Whitmore was. Not a businessman with ambitions. A man who moved through communities buying levers and pulling them. He had just told her with perfect clarity that her position at the school was one of those levers. And he had just made the lever explicitly about her connection to Nathaniel. Which meant Nathaniel was more vulnerable than she'd understood. And she, without intending to, had become part of that vulnerability. She sat with that knowledge for 2 days before she did anything about it. On the third day of Friday, she walked to the main road. At the time she'd learned Nathaniel's riders came past with the mail, and she sent a note up to the ranch house. 4 sentences. She needed to speak with him. It was about Whitmore. She would be at the schoolhouse after 4. He didn't need to come if he was busy. He arrived at 4:10. She told him everything. Whitmore's offer. The implication about alignment. The explicit suggestion about distancing herself from Nathaniel. She told it factually in order without dramatizing it, because she'd found over the years that the plain version of things was generally more useful than the inflamed version. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to tell her he was actually thinking rather than just waiting to respond. "He came to you directly," he said. "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." His jaw tightened just slightly. "He's trying to isolate the pieces." "I know." She paused. "I wanted you to know that I didn't agree to anything, and I won't." "I know you didn't." "Oh. I'm not telling you because I need you to believe me," she said. "I'm telling you because the conversation was about you, and you had a right to know it happened." He looked at her. "He threatened your job." "He implied that my job would become more difficult." She made a small, deliberate distinction. It was subtle enough that no one would call it a threat. "But you called it one." "I called it what it was," she said. "Yes." Nathaniel stood up and walked to the window, not looking out of it. Just giving himself 6 feet of space, which she'd observed was what he did when he was working through something he didn't want to say wrong. "You could take the other position," he said. "If he builds the school, it would pay more and it would be safe, and you wouldn't be connected to a land dispute." "I could," she said. But I'd be working for a man who just tried to buy my loyalties. And he'd know that I knew that, and he'd know exactly what that meant about what I could be asked to do next time." She looked at Nathaniel's back. "I'm not interested in being someone's managed asset, Mr. Brooks. Even a well-compensated one." He turned around. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. The question was quiet and not unkind, but it was direct, and she understood what he was actually asking. He wasn't asking why she was relaying information. He was asking why she had walked to the road and flagged down a rider and waited all day to tell him something that ultimately protected him more than it protected her. She took a breath. "Because you've been honest with me," she said. "From the first night. You've been—" She stopped, tried again. "Most people talk around things. You don't. You say what you mean, and you let me say what I mean, and that's rarer than it should be." She paused. "I've had people speak well of me in public and undercut me in private. I've had people help me with one hand and put me in their debt with the other. You fixed a roof. You walked into a board meeting. You didn't ask for anything after." She met his eyes. "I thought you deserved the same thing back. Honesty. In the direction that costs me something." Nathaniel was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in Abernethy's store. With that expression, she'd been slowly learning to read, not the guarded, closed expression he gave to most of the world, but the one underneath it. Open in the way that things are open when they've stopped worrying about being seen. "Clara," he said. Her name in his mouth sounded different from the way anyone else said it. Slower. Like it was something he'd been holding carefully. "What?" she said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think the truth is inconvenient." Her heart was doing something undignified. She ignored it. "Ask." "When you think about leaving Silver Creek," he said slowly. Not because of Whitmore, just in general. When you think about leaving, is there anything here that makes you want to stay? The question hung between them. She thought about the children. Thomas and his arithmetic. Ruth and her school board anxieties. The Gallagher cabin with its fixed roof and its still drafty windows, and the pot she'd kept under the drip for 2 months, which she had honestly grown attached to as an emblem of her own stubbornness. She thought about a man riding the east fence every 3 days. Yes, she said. There is. He nodded once slowly, like something had been confirmed that he'd needed confirmed. All right, he said. Is that all? She said. You asked a large question for a one-word answer. It was a large enough answer, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside the afternoon was going gray, and somewhere in the north pasture one of his hands was calling to another, and the ordinary world continued its ordinary operations around them. Whitmore's going to try something bigger, she said. Whatever this was, it was preparation. He was testing whether I could be moved. I know, and now he knows I can't be. That makes you a liability to him, Nathaniel said. You understand that. I understand it. She said it without flinching. It doesn't change my answer. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that she had no previous experience to name, because no one had ever looked at her quite this way before, with something that was equal parts respect, and something warmer. Something that had been building for weeks and was now sitting very close to the surface. Go home, he said finally, and his voice was careful. Lock the door. I'll have Hector ride the road tonight. You don't have to, Clara. He said her name the same way he'd said it before, slow, careful. Let me. She looked at him. All right, she said. She walked home in the last of the evening light, and she was almost to the cabin door when she heard the sound she hadn't been listening for, but had been half expecting the single measured footfall of a horse being kept to a walk. Hector riding the road, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to see the door. She stood on the step for a moment. Then she went inside and locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight and looked at the arithmetic she had to grade, and instead of grading it, thought about a man who said, "Let me," like it was a complete sentence. Outside, the night was cold and steady, and the east fence ran the whole length of the territory, and somewhere along it, Nathaniel Brooks was probably finding more things to inspect. She almost smiled. Then she picked up her red pencil and got to work. The letter from Helena arrived on a Tuesday, and Robert Crane brought it himself, rather than sending a writer which told Nathaniel everything he needed to know about its contents before he broke the seal. Crane sat across from him at the ranch house table and waited while Nathaniel read it, then read it again, then set it down with the controlled deliberateness of a man who has trained himself not to show the first version of his reactions in front of other people. They accepted his survey, Nathaniel said. Provisionally, Crane said. Pending a formal boundary review, but yes, the territorial office has placed the 240 acres under contested status, which means you cannot sell, develop, or use that land as collateral until the dispute is resolved. How long? I told you 6 to 8 months. I was optimistic. Crane paused. Whitmore's lawyers filed 3 supplementary challenges on Friday. Each one buys him another delay. We're looking at a year minimum, possibly longer if he keeps filing. Nathaniel stood up. He walked to the far side of the room and stood there with his back to Crane for a moment, not out of rudeness, just needing the 6 feet of space to think in. The supplementary challenges, he said. On what grounds? Historical land grant discrepancies. He found a gap in the original 1871 survey documentation. It's thin legally, but thin is enough to file and filing is enough to delay. And the South Water... Crane's pause was longer this time. Willis Kane signed with Whitmore's agent yesterday. Nathaniel turned around. Willis? His daughter's surgery is scheduled for next week, Crane said quietly. He needed the money. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. I know you made him an offer. I offered to cover the medical costs. He didn't want the debt. Crane met his eyes. Some men won't take help from a neighbor. You know that as well as I do. He did know that. He understood it in his bones because he had been that man once younger and prouder than was good for him turning down a hand up, because accepting it would have meant admitting he needed it. He couldn't be angry at Willis for it. He just felt the loss of it solid and specific, sitting somewhere behind his sternum. What does Kane's land give Whitmore? He said. Combined with the Decker property, he now controls the primary drainage from the North Ridge into your south watershed. If he builds any kind of diversion structure, and his permits suggest he intends to your south pasture, loses reliable water access by late summer. That's 40% of my summer grazing land. Yes. The room was very quiet. He planned this in sequence, Nathaniel said. The boundary dispute first to tie up my legal resources, then the south acquisitions to threaten the operational foundation. He's building a box. He is, Crane agreed. And he's doing it legally. Every step legally. So far. Crane looked at him. So far, he agreed carefully. Nathaniel picked up the Helena letter and read the third paragraph again. Provisional contested status. Pending formal boundary review. The language of bureaucratic delay, each phrase technically neutral and practically devastating. What do I need to win the boundary case? He said. The original survey documentation from 1871. The actual field notes, not just the recorded summary. If we can prove the boundary was correctly established in the original survey, the supplementary challenges collapse. Crane hesitated. The problem is those field notes aren't in the county records. They should be, but they're not, which is either a filing error from 50 years ago, or someone removed them, Nathaniel said. I can't say that, Crane said carefully. I didn't ask you to say it. I said it. Nathaniel set the letter down. Where would they be if they exist? The original surveyor was a man named Aldous Merritt. He died in 1879. His effects went to his son who moved to Billings. Crane paused. Whitmore is from Billings. The silence in the room changed quality. That's a coincidence, Nathaniel said. It may be, Crane said. Or Whitmore did his research before he came here, identified the gap in the documentation, and built his strategy around it. Another pause. I've written to Merritt's son. I haven't heard back. Write again, Nathaniel said. And this time make clear there are legal consequences for suppressing survey documentation in a territorial dispute. He picked up his hat. I'm going to need some time to think. Of course. Crane stood. Nathaniel, one more thing. He stopped. Whitmore had dinner with the Pedersons last Thursday, Crane said. 3 members of the Territorial Land Commission were present. I don't know what was discussed, but I know that 2 of those commissioners were appointed through a political connection that Whitmore's family has maintained in Helena for 12 years. He let that sit for a moment. This isn't just about the land. He has relationships in the places where these decisions get made. Nathaniel nodded once. I know, he said, and walked out. He rode to the schoolhouse without planning to. That was the honest version, and he had been making himself tell himself the honest version more often lately, because Clara had a way of making dishonesty feel like too much work. He didn't construct a reason this time. He didn't tell himself it was the fence or the road or something Martinez needed to check. He just rode in the direction that made the most sense to him, which was east, and which ended, as it increasingly did, at a small schoolhouse on the edge of his property, where a woman was usually doing something purposeful. She was on the step when he arrived in her coat, eating an apple and reading a letter. She looked up when she heard him, and her face did its small recalibration, not guarded but adjusted, preparing for information. You have the look, she said. What look? The one that means something has happened, and you're deciding how to say it. She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket. Say it plain. So he told her. Straight through, no softening the Helena, ruling the supplementary challenges, Willis Kane, the Southwater Crane's information about the Billings surveyor and the missing field notes, and the Territorial Commission connections. He told it the way she told him things, in order factually without performing the emotions around it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. "He's been building this for longer than 6 months, she said. Yes? He came here knowing about the survey gap. He bought the Decker land because of where it sat relative to your south line. He approached me about the teaching position because—" She stopped. Thought. "Because he needed to know whether I was a variable he could control. That's what I think. And now he knows I'm not." She looked up. "Which means he'll come at you through something else, or try to make the pressure on me big enough that I reach for the obvious solution." She looked at him steadily. "Victoria Hale. If I marry into the Hale estate, I consolidate enough land and financial position to weather the legal costs and the water issue. Whitmore's strategy becomes less effective." He paused. "That's the arithmetic." "Is that what you're considering?" He met her eyes. "No." A short silence. "Nathaniel," she said, and the use of his given name was deliberate. He heard her make the choice. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear the whole question before you answer it." "Go ahead." "The boundary survey field notes. The ones that should be in the county records and aren't." She was thinking out loud now, following something through. Who would have access to the county records office? He thought about it. The county clerk, any registered attorney, landowners with documented filings in the territory. "Whitmore has documented filings now," she said. "The boundary dispute." "He does." "So he had legitimate access to the county records office after he filed." She paused. "But the notes were already gone. You said Crane described it as either a filing error or someone removed them." "Yes." "Then either they were never properly filed in 1871 or someone removed them before Whitmore arrived." She looked at him. "Before he arrived?" He was very still. "Someone who knew the gap was there." "Someone who created the gap," she said. "And then waited." The implication settled between them like cold water. "He had someone here before him," Nathaniel said. "Or he is someone who has been here longer than we think," Clara said. "Not in person, but present, through someone else." She paused. "Who manages the county records office?" "Gerald Marsh," he said. And then they both heard it at the same time, the echo of a school board meeting a salary cut delivered without warning a man who had not wanted the board minutes documented. Gerald Marsh, who ran the school board. Gerald Marsh, who had access to every county record in Silver Creek. "That's a serious accusation to make without evidence," Nathaniel said carefully. "I'm not making an accusation," Clara said with equal care. "I'm asking a question." She looked at him. "Where has Marsh been banking his money for the last 2 years? Because his house was repaired last spring, and his wife has a new carriage, and his county clerk's salary hasn't changed." Nathaniel looked at her. "How do you know about Marsh's house?" he said. "I walk past it every Wednesday on my way to post a letter," she said. "I notice things." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'd make a formidable lawyer." "I'm a teacher. We learn to identify which child took which piece of chalk." She stood up from the step. "Find out where Marsh banks, and find out if Whitmore has any financial connections in that direction. Robert Crane can look into that. Have him look quietly." She paused. "If Marsh knows someone is looking, he'll have time to move things." Nathaniel looked at her, this woman standing on the step of a schoolhouse with an apple in one hand, calmly pulling at the thread of a conspiracy that his own lawyers had missed, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just respect, something past respect, something that lived in the same neighborhood as wonder. "Clara," he said. "I know," she said quietly. And somehow she did know, knew what he was going to say before he said it, or knew the shape of the thing, even if she didn't know the words, and she looked at him with that expression that was not quite a smile, but held all the preconditions of one. "Not yet," she said softly. "Finish this first. Then we'll talk." He nodded. He rode back to town to find Robert Crane. What Crane found working quietly over the following 5 days was worse and more specific than either of them had feared. Gerald Marsh had opened a secondary account at a bank in Billings 18 months ago, 2 months before Whitmore purchased the Decker property, and 3 months before the county's 1871 survey documentation was last confirmed present by an independent auditor. The account had received 4 deposits totaling $1,100. Not an enormous amount by territorial standards, but an enormous amount for a county clerk on a fixed salary. The bank in Billings was one that Whitmore's family had used for 30 years. Crane laid the documentation on Nathaniel's table on a Thursday evening and sat back and let it speak for itself. "This is not proof of a crime," Crane said. "Not yet. A man can open an account wherever he likes, and coincidence of banking institution is not conspiracy." "But it's enough to go to the territorial marshal," Nathaniel said. "It's enough to initiate an inquiry," Crane said carefully. "Which is different. An inquiry means questions asked, documents subpoenaed, people required to account for their actions. It also means—" He paused. "It becomes public. Once you initiate a territorial inquiry, it's on record. Whitmore will know immediately." "Good," Nathaniel said. Crane looked at him. "Nathaniel, if we move too early, if we initiate the inquiry before we have the field notes themselves, Whitmore has time to suppress whatever else exists and make this look like a desperate counterattack from a man losing a land dispute. Then we need the field notes first. I've written to Merritt's son twice. No response." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's the son's name?" "Thomas Merritt. He works at a dry goods firm in Billings. 38, unmarried, no real connection to his father's surveying work." Crane paused. "He might not even know what he has. Or he knows exactly what he has and has been paid to not respond. Also possible." Nathaniel looked at the banking documents. He thought about something Clara had said, that Whitmore moved through communities buying levers and pulling them. Marsh had been a lever. Thomas Merritt might be another. The question was, which levers could be pulled in the other direction? "I'll go to Billings," he said. Crane opened his mouth. "Not you," Nathaniel said. "Me. If I send a lawyer, Merritt knows it's official and either panics or goes to ground. If I go myself as a man who wants to talk about his father's work—" He paused. "People talk differently to a man than to a legal letter. You'd be gone 3 days minimum." "I know. Whitmore will notice your absence." "Let him." Nathaniel stood up. "Book me a seat on Saturday's stage, and say nothing to anyone." He went to the schoolhouse the following afternoon because there was a conversation he needed to have before he left, and he had been working up to it for 3 days. Clara was grading papers when he knocked. She let him in, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table, and she looked at his face and put down her pen. "Tell me," she said. He told her about Crane's findings. About the Billings bank account, the timing, the connection to Whitmore's family institution. He told her about Merritt's son and his plan to go to Billings himself on Saturday. She listened with her hands flat on the table and her eyes focused somewhere slightly past his shoulder, which he had learned was her thinking posture, not inattention, but the opposite of it. "You're going alone," she said. "John Petty knows where I'll be." "That's not what I asked." "Yes," he said. "I'm going alone." She brought her eyes back to his face. "Be careful how you approach the son. If he's been paid, he'll report the contact. You'll have one conversation, and it needs to count." "I know. Don't lead with the land dispute. Lead with the father." She leaned forward slightly. "You said the son has no connection to the surveying work. That means he may not know what the field notes actually are. If you approach it as wanting to preserve his father's professional record, wanting to make sure Aldous Merritt's work is properly credited in a territorial boundary proceeding, it's not a threat. It's respect." Nathaniel looked at her. "That's exactly the right angle." "It's the honest angle," she said. "His father did accurate work. You're trying to confirm that. Both things can be true at the same time." He was quiet for a moment. "Why aren't you a lawyer?" he said. "I can't afford law school," she said with such matter-of-fact directness that he felt it in his chest. and women aren't admitted to the territorial bar. She paused. But I read, and I pay attention. She looked at him again. Come back safe. The words were quiet. Not dramatic. She wasn't a woman who delivered lines for effect. But they were the kind of words that carry extra weight precisely because they're said simply without decoration by someone who doesn't say things they don't mean. I will, he said. He stood to go. Nathaniel. Her voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She was still sitting at the table, her red pencil in her hand, and she was looking at him with the open expression, the one underneath the professional guarded surface, and she said, When you come back, I'd like to finish the conversation we almost had last week. He looked at her for a long moment. So would I, he said, and he left. Billings was a 3-day round trip, and Nathaniel spent the first leg of it on the stage next to a cattle broker from Missoula who wanted to discuss winter feed prices, which Nathaniel managed to redirect twice before giving up and discussing winter feed prices. Thomas Merritt worked at Halston's Dry Goods on Commerce Street, and he was a thin, careful-looking man of about 40 who had his father's eyes in an otherwise unremarkable face. Nathaniel walked in on a slow Tuesday morning, bought a box of horseshoe nails he didn't need, and when Merritt came to ring him up, said, Your father surveyed the eastern Montana territories in 1871. I have land out there. I'm trying to make sure his work gets proper credit in a boundary proceeding. Thomas Merritt's hands stopped on the counter, just for a second. But Nathaniel was watching, and he saw it. I don't have anything to do with my father's work, Merritt said. His voice was careful. Too careful in the way that people are careful when they've rehearsed being careful. I'm not asking you to do anything with it, Nathaniel said. I'm asking if his field notes survived, specifically the notes from the East Yellowstone section late summer of 1871. He paused. If they're in your possession, I'd like to look at them, that's all. Merritt looked at him. Who are you? Nathaniel Brooks. I own the land in question. A longer pause. Merritt glanced toward the back of the store, checking something or checking whether someone was watching. Nathaniel couldn't tell which. Someone else already asked about those notes, Merritt said very quietly. Recently? 8 months ago, a lawyer from Billings said he was representing a land acquisition firm. Merritt's jaw tightened. He was persuasive about the value of keeping certain documents private. He paid you, Nathaniel said without accusation. Factually. Merritt didn't answer, which was its own answer. Thomas. Nathaniel kept his voice level. Whatever arrangement you made 8 months ago, I want you to understand something. If those notes exist, and if they show what I think they show, then what's being done with their absence is fraud on a territorial record, which makes the person who was paid to keep them private a participant in that fraud. He paused. I'm not saying that to threaten you. I'm saying it because you should know what you're sitting in the middle of. Merritt's face had gone through several things in the last 30 seconds, and what it settled on was not quite fear and not quite resolve, but something between the two. My father was a careful man, Merritt said quietly. He kept copies of everything. The county gets the filed version. He always kept a personal copy. Nathaniel waited. I didn't sell the personal copy, Merritt said. I only agreed not to volunteer its existence. He looked at Nathaniel. That's a meaningful distinction, isn't it? It's a very meaningful distinction, Nathaniel said. Where is the personal copy? Merritt looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Give me until tomorrow morning. Come back at 9. Nathaniel spent the night in a Billings boarding house and did not sleep until after 2 in the morning, which was when he stopped running probability calculations and allowed himself briefly to think about Clara, about the way she'd looked at him across the kitchen table, about the conversation they'd almost had and the one she'd said she wanted to finish. About a woman who noticed things new, carriages, repaired houses, the specific weight of a man's silence, and turned noticing into understanding with a precision that was genuinely remarkable. He had been alone for 4 years in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people around him. He had been surrounded by people and been profoundly specifically alone. He had not understood until recently that the loneliness was not about quantity, but about recognition. about being known by someone who was paying actual attention rather than managing an impression of you. Clara paid attention. She paid it the way she paid everything honestly, directly, without asking for credit. He turned over in the narrow boarding house bed and stared at the ceiling and made a decision that had probably been building since the harvest gathering and was now simply complete. Finished. The way a fence post is finished when it's in the ground and you've stopped pushing on it. He knew what he was going to do. He just needed to get through tomorrow first. At 9 in the morning, Thomas Merritt was waiting outside Halston's with a flat oilskin envelope under his arm and the expression of a man who has made a decision he's unsure of and has decided not to be unsure of it anymore. He handed the envelope to Nathaniel without preamble. "The field notes from the 1871 East Yellowstone survey," he said. "In my father's handwriting. Dated, witnessed, and indexed." He paused. "The boundary line they establish puts the 240 acres you mentioned on the Brooks side. Unambiguously." Nathaniel took the envelope. "You've read them?" "I read them after the lawyer came, to understand what I was sitting on." Merritt looked at him steadily. "I wanted on record, not legal record, just between us, that I didn't know what they were going to be used for when I agreed to keep quiet. I thought it was a routine property matter." "I believe you," Nathaniel said. "What happens now?" "Now I take these to my attorney, who files them with the territorial office and initiates a fraud inquiry." He paused. "Your name will come up. I can't prevent that. But what you've just done will also come up." Merritt nodded slowly. "My father spent 40 years doing accurate work. I let someone pay me to bury it." He said it plainly, without self-pity. "I'd rather be the man who corrected that than the man who let it stand." Nathaniel looked at him, thought of Willis Kane, who'd sold his land to pay his daughter's medical bills and carried the weight of it straight. Thought of Clara, who'd turned down a job rather than become someone's managed asset. People he thought kept surprising him. "Your father did good work," he said. "It's going to stand." He took the stage back to Silver Creek that afternoon. He was not prepared for what he found when he arrived. John Petty met him at the edge of town, which was wrong. John didn't ride to meet stages. John waited at the ranch. The look on John's face was controlled in the way that John controlled things when he was managing something he didn't want to mishandle. "What happened?" Nathaniel said. "Whitmore moved while you were gone," John said. "He filed an emergency injunction through the county clerk's office, Marsh, citing the contested boundary status. The injunction blocks all operations on the eastern pasture. Your hands have been stopped from working that section since yesterday morning." "That's aggressive," Nathaniel said. "It gets worse." John's voice stayed level. "He went to the school board yesterday afternoon. He told them that the schoolhouse on the east boundary sits on contested land, and therefore the board's authorization to operate it is under question. He recommended suspending operations pending resolution." Nathaniel went very still. "He's going after the school," he said. "He suspended Clara's position," John said. "Effective immediately, pending the land dispute resolution." The words arrived one at a time, each one landing separately. He thought about her face, about the way she'd said, "Come back safe," about the conversation they were going to have when this was finished. "Is she still at the cabin?" he said. "Far as I know." He did not go to the ranch house. He rode directly east. She knew he was coming before he knocked. She had seen the horse from the window, and she opened the door already in her coat, as though she'd been about to leave, or had been pacing, and the coat had simply stayed on. Her face was composed. That was the thing that hit him hardest. She had been suspended from her position, and she was standing in her doorway with her face composed because she was the kind of woman who did not give the thing that hurt her the satisfaction of showing on her face before she was ready. "I heard," he said. "I know." "Clara." "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." He came inside. She put coffee on without asking whether he wanted it because she needed something to do with her hands, and he understood that, so he sat at the kitchen table and waited. She put the coffee down and sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "He did it to draw you back," she said finally. He knew you'd gone somewhere. He wanted to force your hand. He succeeded, Nathaniel said. Don't let him. Her voice was quiet, but it had iron in it, the same iron he'd heard the first night, the smooth-worn kind. If you move too fast because he went after me, you'll do it wrong. You have the field notes. He placed the oilskin envelope on the table between them. She looked at it. Then file them, she said. Through Crane, through the territorial office, correctly. Don't let what he did to the school push you into moving before you're ready. You just lost your position. I know what I just lost. She met his eyes. I've lost positions before. I'll manage. A pause. This is bigger than my position, Nathaniel. If Whitmore has people inside the county administration Marsh, whoever else, and you move wrong, he walks away from this and rebuilds elsewhere and does it again to someone who doesn't have Robert Crane or survey documentation. She paused. Do it right. For Willis Kane and for the South Ranchers and for everyone he's already moved against. He looked at her across the table. This woman who had just been stripped of her livelihood was telling him not to make the mistake of rushing justice on her behalf. You're remarkable, he said. The word came out quiet and specific, and she heard the weight in it, and something moved through her expression, something she didn't entirely manage to contain. File the notes, she said softly. And then... She stopped. And then we'll talk, he said. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. Then we'll talk. Outside, the November wind was picking up, moving hard and cold out of the north, and inside the small Gallagher cabin, the lamp was burning, and 2 cups of coffee were going cold on the table, because neither of them was paying attention to the coffee anymore. The oilskin envelope sat between them like a held breath. Tomorrow everything would start moving, everything. But right now, for one more moment, it was just the 2 of them on either side of a table, and the thing that had been building since a harvest gathering in October was sitting in the room with them, patient and certain, waiting for its time. Robert Crane filed the field notes with the territorial office in Helena on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Silver Creek knew something had shifted. Not because anyone made an announcement, not because Nathaniel said a word to anyone outside of John Petty and Clara, but because Gerald Marsh left his office at the county clerk's building at 2 in the afternoon and did not come back, and his assistant, a young man named Davis, who had worked there for 6 months and had no idea what he'd been sitting in the middle of, told 3 separate people that Mr. Marsh had received a letter and gone pale, and said he needed to attend to something. And those 3 people told 6 more, and Silver Creek, which had functioning information networks that would have impressed a military general, had the broad strokes of it by sundown. Nathaniel knew the news was moving because Victoria Hale appeared at his ranch house door on Saturday morning without sending word ahead, which she had never done before. He let her in. He offered coffee. He waited. She sat across from him at the long table in the front room with the careful composure of a woman who had prepared what she wanted to say and was making herself say it in the right order. I've heard things, she said. What things? About a filing in Helena. About Gerald Marsh, about Charles Whitmore's connection to the billing survey firm. She paused. About what all of it means for the eastern boundary dispute. What do you think it means? He said. She looked at him steadily. I think it means you're going to win, she said. And I think the people in this town, who have been waiting to see which direction this falls, are going to start choosing sides very quickly now. Is that what you're doing? He said. Choosing sides? She held his gaze for a long moment. Victoria Hale was not a foolish woman he had never thought she was. She was practical and self-aware and honest enough in her own way, and what he saw in her face right now was not manipulation, but something closer to reckoning. I want to be honest with you, she said. I think I owe you that. Go ahead. I knew about the school board salary reduction before it happened, she said. Marsh mentioned it at a dinner I hosted. I didn't argue against it. She let that sit. I told myself it wasn't my concern, that it was a board matter. Another pause. I think I told myself that because opposing it would have required opposing Marsh, and Marsh was connected to Whitmore, and I wasn't ready yet to decide which side of that I was on. The room was quiet. "You're telling me this now," he said. "Because now the decision is clearer," she said. "And because I think—" She stopped, tried again. "I think I've spent the last year believing that I was a natural partner for you because of what we both have, land and money and position. And that's true as far as it goes. But I've watched you the last 2 months, and I've watched the way you move through this situation, and I've watched—" She stopped again. "I've watched where you go when you need to think." He was very still. "I'm not here to make an argument," Victoria said quietly. "I'm here because I owe you honesty, and I owe Clara Bennett an apology, and I thought I should start with you." She stood up. "I'd like to testify. To the territorial inquiry. About Marsh's conversation at my dinner table. About what I heard and when I heard it." Nathaniel looked at her. This was not what he had expected from this visit. "That testimony," he said carefully, "will damage your standing with the people who've been aligned with Whitmore." "I know." "Some of those people are significant to your business interests." "I know that too." She picked up her gloves from the table. "But my father built what I have by being on the right side of things. Not the comfortable side, the right side." She looked at him. "I'd like to do the same." He nodded slowly. "I'll tell Crane to contact you." She moved to the door and then paused. "Nathaniel, she's good. I don't mean that generously, I mean it accurately. She's the kind of good that's hard to find." She paused. "Don't make her wait longer than she already has." She left before he could respond. He sat at the table for a while after that, holding his coffee cup, and thought about what it cost a person to walk through a door and say a true thing when the true thing required them to diminish themselves. And he thought that Victoria Hale, whatever her calculations and her social arithmetic, had just done something that was genuinely difficult. He thought about Clara's word. Honest in the direction that cost you something. The territorial inquiry was formally opened on a Monday 12 days after Crane filed the field notes. The speed was unusual, which Crane attributed to 2 things: the quality of the documentation and the fact that one of the 3 land commissioners who'd had dinner with Whitmore at the Pedersons had, upon learning that a fraud inquiry was opening, immediately filed a voluntary disclosure with the territorial office about that dinner and its contents. This commissioner, a man named Forsyth, whom Nathaniel had never met, had apparently decided that the view from the correct side of history was worth more than whatever Whitmore had offered him. "It's collapsing," Crane told him on Tuesday morning. "When the structure starts giving way, the people inside it start moving toward the exits. Forsyth's disclosure makes 2 of the remaining connections more vulnerable, and vulnerable people talk." "Marsh," Nathaniel said. "Marsh retained an attorney in Billings yesterday, which means he's negotiating." Crane paused. "He'll cooperate in exchange for reduced exposure, that's almost certain." "What does he know?" "If Whitmore used him to access the county records, and the financial evidence suggests he did, then Marsh knows exactly how the documentation gap was created. Dates, instructions, who paid him." Crane looked at him. "This is going to move quickly now. Once the inquiry has Marsh's cooperation, they can pull Whitmore's financial records, trace the payment, subpoena the Billings bank accounts." He paused. "It will also become public. The inquiry is a public record." "That's fine," Nathaniel said. "There will be a formal hearing before the Land Commission. You'll need to be present. So will Thomas Merritt as the holder of the original field notes." Crane hesitated. "Clara Bennett may be called as well. Her conversation with Whitmore, his attempt to redirect her loyalties, constitutes potential witness tampering if it can be established that he knew she had relevant information about the land dispute." Nathaniel thought about that conversation on the schoolhouse step. Whitmore's carriage, his carefully reasonable voice, and Clara walking away down the road with her spine straight and her answer clear. "She'll testify," Nathaniel said. "She won't hesitate." "I know," Crane said. "I've met her." He paused. "She came to my office last Wednesday." Nathaniel looked up. "She did. She brought her record of the conversation with Whitmore written out in full, dated and signed. She said she wrote it down that same evening because she'd anticipated it might be relevant." Crane allowed himself a small expression of professional admiration. "It's the clearest, most precisely documented account of intimidation I've seen in 20 years of practice. Every word in sequence with her analysis of the implied threat." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. He thought about her at the kitchen table that night, with her red pencil and her papers, writing down every word of a conversation she'd already told him she was going to set aside and deal with later. She had done both at once, told him, then come home and documented it before she slept. "She thought ahead," he said. "She thought ahead," Crane agreed. He looked at Nathaniel over his glasses with the expression of a man who has observed things he has opinions about and is choosing whether to voice them. He apparently chose to. "She's been protecting your case for months, Nathaniel, without being asked, without telling you everything she was doing." He paused. "I've watched people fight land cases for a long time. The ones that win, it's usually not because the lawyers are better. It's because someone on the right side cared enough to notice the things everyone else missed." Nathaniel said nothing. "I'm just noting it," Crane said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth a great deal," Nathaniel said. He left Crane's office and stood on the main street of Silver Creek in the November cold and thought about a woman who had walked into a lawyer's office on her own time, on her suspended salary, with her precise and carefully documented record of a man trying to buy her away from the truth. He had said he would talk to her when this was finished. He had been telling himself that the right time to have that conversation was after the hearing, after the inquiry, after the dust settled and the outcome was clear. He was no longer certain he could wait that long. So he went to the cabin that evening. She opened the door and looked at his face and said, "Come in," with the particular steadiness of someone who has been expecting a version of this and has decided to meet it without maneuvering. He came in. He did not sit down. He stood in her kitchen with his hat in his hands and said, "Crane told me about the documentation you brought him." "It was relevant," she said. "I should have brought it sooner." "Clara, I know what you're going to say," she said quietly. "I don't think you do," he said. She looked at him. Something in his tone had shifted from the conversations they'd had before, more direct, less careful around the edges, and she heard it, and she waited. "I've been telling myself I would wait until after the hearing," he said. "Until things were resolved, until I could offer you something stable instead of a situation that's still—" He stopped, started again. "That's not honest. The truth is, I've known what I want to say for a long time, and I've been waiting for circumstances to be neat enough that saying it would feel sensible." "And," she said, "and I've decided that waiting for circumstances to be neat is a thing I've been doing for 4 years, and it hasn't produced anything worth having." She was very still. "I came here tonight," he said, "because I want to tell you something, and I want to tell you now, not after the hearing, not when the land is clear and the position is restored and everything is tidy." He held her gaze. "I want to tell you now, when you've just had your livelihood suspended, and I'm in the middle of a territorial fraud case, and we're both standing in a drafty cabin with cold coffee on the table. I want to tell you now because now is actually honest." She took a breath. It was almost imperceptible, but he was paying attention. "Then tell me," she said. "I haven't been riding the east fence because it needs inspection," he said. "I haven't been finding reasons to come by this schoolhouse because of the roof or the pump or anything else. I've been coming because—" He stopped, said it plainly. "Because this is where I want to be. Because you are the most honestly alive person I have met in a very long time, and being near you makes me feel like I'm actually present in my own life, instead of just managing it." He paused. "And I've known that for weeks, and I should have said so before now." Clara was looking at him with an expression that was not guarded and not composed, or it had been until about 30 seconds ago, and now it was something else. Something that a person couldn't quite keep in when they'd been carrying it carefully for too long. "Nathaniel," she said, and her voice was different, softer, without the professional steadiness, without the careful management. "I told you the night of the harvest gathering that I don't want your pity." "I know. This isn't pity. No, he said, it isn't. Because if it were, she stopped. It isn't, he said again. Clara, I am standing here because I am a man who has spent 4 years building something that means nothing to me without someone worth building it with. And I have been trying to figure out for the last 2 months how to say that without it sounding like something I rehearsed. It doesn't sound rehearsed, she said. Does it sound true? She looked at him for a long moment. It sounds true, she said. He took one step toward her. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that whatever happens with the hearing, with the inquiry, with all of it, the reason I've been fighting this as hard as I've been fighting it isn't only the land. He paused. It's because you told Whitmore no. And you documented every word he said to you. And you walked into my lawyer's office on your own time without telling me because you thought it would help, and you thought the case mattered more than the credit. He paused again. I wanted you to know that I see that. Something moved through her face, something she didn't try to contain. You see a lot, she said quietly. I'm paying attention, he said. She was close enough now that he could see her breathing change. I'm not easy to be with, she said. It came out honest and slightly rough, the way things come out when someone's saying a truth they've been carrying. I argue. I keep my own books. I don't ask for help until I'm nearly past needing it. I have strong opinions about the school board and arithmetic and what counts as a fair wage, and I will express those opinions in rooms that would prefer I didn't. I know, he said. That doesn't worry you. It's why I'm here. She looked at him, the way she'd looked at him from across the harvest room the first night, except that now they were 6 inches apart, and there was no room full of people between them, and the thing she was looking for, she appeared to find. All right, she said softly. All right, he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said, The coffee is cold. I know. I could make more. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. And there it was. The small, involuntary smile, real and unguarded, the one he'd been watching for since the first night. I'm choosing to. He almost laughed. He didn't quite. But it was close, and she saw it, and she shook her head slightly with an expression that was fond and a little exasperated, and entirely unperformed. She put the coffee on. He sat at her kitchen table, and they talked not about Whitmore, not about the hearing, not about the land. They talked the way they'd talked at the harvest gathering when neither of them had planned to talk at all. The way you talk when you've stopped needing things to be arranged correctly before the conversation can start. He left at 10 o'clock because the road was dark and she had school in the morning. She was still teaching without pay and without the board's authorization because she had decided that 31 children did not stop needing their lessons because Gerald Marsh and Charles Whitmore had a land dispute. She had been showing up every morning for 11 days and teaching, and the parents of those 31 children had been showing up every morning to let her. He stood in the doorway. What you're doing, he said. Teaching without pay. The parents know. The parents started bringing food, she said. Ruth organized it. I told them not to, and they did it anyway. She paused. People have their own kinds of defiance. He looked at her. So do you, he said. She tilted her head. Some more than others. He put his hat on. I'll send word when Crane has news from Helena. I know. He stepped outside. The night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that made everything precise. Nathaniel. Her voice at the door. He turned. What you said tonight, she said, about fighting for something other than the land. She paused. I've been fighting too. I want you to know that. Not for the school, or for the position, or because of what Whitmore did. She met his eyes. I've been fighting because this place matters to me now, in ways it didn't 2 months ago. She paused. I thought you should know. He looked at her in the lamplight at the door of the drafty Gallagher cabin. I know, he said. And he rode home through the cold, dark feeling for the first time in a very long time, like the size of what he was riding home to matched the size of what he'd built. The formal hearing before the Territorial Land Commission was scheduled for a Thursday, 3 weeks after the inquiry opened. In those 3 weeks, the situation moved with the compressed, accelerating logic of things that have been delayed too long and are now making up for lost time. Marsh's cooperation produced banking records that traced $1,100 from a Whitmore family account through a Billings intermediary to a Silver Creek deposit in Marsh's name. The Billings survey firm that had conducted Whitmore's competing boundary survey was found to have a prior contractual relationship with Whitmore's father's land acquisition company going back 7 years, which destroyed any claim of independence. And Thomas Merritt, standing before a notary in Billings, swore under oath that the field notes were in his father's handwriting undoctored and had been in his possession since 1879. Whitmore hired 2 lawyers from Helena and 1 from Billings. Nathaniel had Robert Crane. Robert Crane had 40 years of practice and a complete documented sequential record of everything. On the Wednesday before the hearing, Whitmore made his last attempt. He came to Nathaniel's ranch house himself unannounced in the middle of the afternoon. He came alone, which Nathaniel noted, and his face had shed the comfortable confidence that had characterized every previous encounter, replaced by something more pragmatic and less pleasant. John Petty showed him in and then positioned himself near the door, which was something he did when he thought a situation required a witness. Whitmore sat without being invited to. "I want to propose a settlement," he said. "I'm listening," Nathaniel said. "I withdraw the boundary challenge. All supplementary filings. I release the emergency injunction on the eastern pasture." He paused. "In exchange, the territorial inquiry is discontinued. No further legal action regarding the county records, the survey documentation, or any associated financial transactions." Nathaniel looked at him. "You want to walk away clean," he said. "I want both of us to walk away," Whitmore said. "This has been expensive for everyone." "You suborned a county official," Nathaniel said. "You suppressed territorial survey documentation. You attempted to intimidate a witness." "Those are allegations under inquiry," Whitmore said smoothly. "They haven't been adjudicated." "They will be tomorrow." Whitmore's jaw tightened. The hearing could go a number of ways. Legal proceedings are unpredictable. A settlement protects your interest with certainty. "My interests," Nathaniel said, "include Willis Kane getting fair value for the land he sold under financial pressure. They include Clara Bennett's position being restored without conditions. They include Gerald Marsh accounting publicly for what he did to the county records that were in his trust." He paused. "A private settlement between you and me doesn't touch any of those things." Whitmore looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something colder. The look of a man taking final inventory. "You're not going to settle," he said. "No," Nathaniel said. "Even if the hearing doesn't go the way you expect." "It will go the way the evidence says it should go," Nathaniel said. "That's all I've ever asked of it." Whitmore stood up. He picked up his hat from the table and turned it once in his hands, and when he looked at Nathaniel again, the pragmatic pleasantness was entirely gone. "The schoolteacher," he said. "She cost you a settlement." "She gave me something worth more than a settlement," Nathaniel said. "She showed me what a fight worth having looks like." Whitmore held his gaze for a long, flat moment. Then he walked out. John Petty waited until the sound of the carriage had faded. "That went about how I expected," he said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "You all right?" "Better than I've been in a long time," Nathaniel said, and meant it completely. The night before the hearing, Nathaniel could not sleep. He lay in his bed in the large house that had felt like a fortress for 4 years, and he thought about the morning. About Crane's prepared arguments, and Merritt's notarized testimony, and Victoria Hale's account of what she'd heard at her own dinner table. About a banking trail that told a story more clearly than any lawyer could. He thought about Clara in the Gallagher cabin with its fixed roof and its still drafty windows. Probably also not sleeping, probably also at the kitchen table, with something to do with her hands. He thought about what she'd said. "I've been fighting too, in ways it didn't 2 months ago." He got up at 4 in the morning and went to his desk and wrote something. Not a legal document. Not a letter to Crane. Something else short that took him 3 drafts to get right and that he folded and put in his coat pocket. He would decide in the morning whether to use it. He thought he probably would. The hearing was held in the main room of the Territorial Marshal's office, which was the largest interior space in Silver Creek that qualified as official, and it was more crowded than any hearing in recent memory. Crane had told him to expect observers. He had not quite expected every rancher with a South Line property the parents of approximately half the children in Clara's class. Ruth from the school, Margaret Hale, who organized everything on principle, Willis Kane, who had ridden in from his property and stood near the back with his hat in his hands, and an expression of a man who was trying to make something right by being present for it, and Clara, who sat in the second row with her ledger on her knee and her back straight and her face composed, and who met his eyes when he came in and held them for exactly the right length of time. The commission had sent 2 representatives from Helena, men named Aldridge and Pell, who had the brisk, focused energy of people who had read an extensive file and were here to close it. It took 4 hours. Crane presented the field notes. Merritt's testimony was read into the record. The banking documentation was submitted. Victoria Hale testified about Marcia's conversation at her dinner table, with a clarity and specificity that left no useful room for contradiction. Clara's written account of her conversation with Whitmore was entered as evidence. Crane read sections of it aloud in her precise sequential language, and the room was very quiet while he did. Whitmore's lawyers made their arguments. They were good arguments, technically. They were not good enough. At 2 in the afternoon, Commissioner Aldridge set down the file he'd been working through and looked at the room over his glasses. "The Commission finds the Whitmore boundary challenge to be without merit," he said. The 1871 field notes establish the eastern boundary unambiguously in favor of the Brooks property, and evidence of deliberate suppression of those notes renders the challenge not merely incorrect, but fraudulent. He paused. "The emergency injunction on the eastern pasture is dissolved effective immediately. The Commission refers the matter of Gerald Marsh and associated parties to the territorial prosecutor for criminal proceedings." Another pause. The Commission further notes that the school on the eastern boundary sits on property whose legal status is now definitively established, and recommends the Silver Creek School Board restore all associated educational operations without condition. The room moved. Not loudly, not the way crowds move in dramatic stories with cheering and noise. More quietly, like a collective exhale. Willis Kane put his hat back on. Ruth made a sound that might have been the beginning of something she decided not to complete. John Petty, standing against the back wall, met Nathaniel's eyes and gave one small nod, and Nathaniel looked at Clara. She was looking back at him with an expression that was not triumph. It was something quieter than triumph, something that looked more like the specific relief of a person who fought for the right thing and found out that the right thing had in fact mattered. He reached into his coat pocket. He felt the folded paper. Later, he thought, not here, not in this room with all these people. Some things were private. He found her outside in the cold afternoon. She had her coat and her ledger, and she had been making her way toward the road, because that was Clara, the hearing concluded. And she was already thinking about what came next, what needed doing, which children had missed 11 days of school and needed catching up. "Clara," he said. She turned. They were standing in the cold outside the marshal's office, and 30 feet away, people were still filing out and talking, and it was not a private moment exactly, but it was as private as anything was going to be today. He took the paper out of his pocket and held it out to her. She took it, looked at him once, then unfolded it. He watched her read it. 3 sentences. He had spent 3 drafts getting 3 sentences right. She looked up from the paper. Her eyes were doing something he had not seen them do before. Bright in the specific way that a person's eyes go bright when they are in the grip of something real and have given up trying not to show it. "This is not a decision I need you to make today," he said. "Or this week. You can take whatever time you need." "I know," she said. "I mean it. There's no Nathaniel." She said his name in the way she'd started saying it, slow, deliberate, as though she'd decided it was worth the full weight of her attention. I don't need time. He looked at her. The answer is yes, she said. It's been yes for a while. I was waiting for you to ask. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I should have asked sooner. You asked when you were ready, she said. That's when people should ask things. He looked at her in the cold November light. This woman who kept his lawyer's records and taught without pay and walked away from harvest rooms and told the truth to the people. It cost her to tell it to, and felt something settle in him, deep and solid and final, the way a foundation settles when it's found the right ground. I meant what I said in the letter, he said. I know you did, she said. That's why the answer is yes. Behind them, Silver Creek was doing what it always did. Talking, moving, reassembling its understanding of itself around new facts. Willis Kane walked past them toward his horse and paused long enough to give Nathaniel a look that contained in compressed form an entire conversation about doing right by good people. Nathaniel nodded. Willis moved on. Clara folded the letter carefully and put it in her coat pocket, and she looked at Nathaniel with the expression that wasn't quite a smile, but held everything. A smile holds, and she said, I have 31 students who missed 11 days of school. I know. I need to be back in that schoolhouse Monday morning. I know that too. So whatever comes next, she said. It happens around the school schedule. He almost smiled. He was getting better at almost smiling. Understood. Good. She looked at him one more moment. Walk me to the road. He offered her his arm. She took it. And they walked out into the cold Silver Creek afternoon together, not dramatically, not with the town watching, just two people walking in the same direction, which was all it had ever really needed to be. Monday morning, Clara was back in the schoolhouse at 7:30. She had the stove going by 7:45, the arithmetic problems written on the board by 8, and when the first child came through the door at 8:05, Thomas, who arrived early because he lived closest and always ran the last quarter mile, she was sitting at her desk with her grade book open as though she had never been away. Thomas stopped inside the door and looked at her. You're back, he said. I am, she said. For good. For good, she said. He sat down at his desk and opened his reader without another word, but she saw his shoulders settle in a way that told her everything she needed to know about what 11 days without school had felt like to a 9-year-old boy who did his best thinking in this room. By 8:30, all 31 students were present, which had never happened before on a Monday, and Clara understood that the parents had made sure of it, had told their children that today was not a day to be late, had walked them to the door themselves, instead of sending them down the road alone. Ruth appeared at 9 o'clock with a covered dish of something warm that she set on Clara's desk without a word, and then retreated before Clara could tell her it wasn't necessary. It was necessary. Clara was aware of that. She just found gratitude difficult to receive gracefully, which was its own problem she was working on. By the time she dismissed the students at 4, she was tired, in the way that good work makes you tired, used up in the right places, the kind of exhaustion that feels like evidence rather than depletion. She was locking the schoolhouse when she heard a horse on the road and looked up to find Nathaniel riding in at his usual unhurried pace, the pace she had learned to read as deliberate rather than slow. He reined in at the fence. How was it? He said. Thomas arrived early, she said. He's caught up through last Tuesday's arithmetic already. He worked through the missed problems on his own. She paused. He told me he used the rancher problem as a model and made up 12 more like it. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. You're proud of him? Enormously, she said without any self-consciousness about admitting it. What's happened in town? He swung down from his horse and fell into step beside her as she started toward the cabin. Whitmore left Silver Creek this morning. His lawyers are negotiating with the territorial prosecutor about the criminal referral. Crane thinks he'll settle the fraud charges to avoid a full trial, which means financial penalties and a permanent bar from land acquisition in Montana Territory. He gets to walk away, Clara said, from Montana Territory, with a record that follows him. Nathaniel paused. It's not everything. No, she said. But it's something. She considered it. What about Marsh? Resigned his position this morning. The prosecutor is working through his cooperation agreement. He gave them everything on the Billings connection, which gives the territorial office what it needs to clean up the land commission appointments. Nathaniel paused. Forsyth, the commissioner who voluntarily disclosed, is keeping his seat. Aldridge told Crane he's been one of their more reliable people for years. Getting tangled with Whitmore was apparently the result of a social relationship rather than a financial one. That's a meaningful distinction, Clara said. Not a complete defense, but meaningful. That's what Crane said. She glanced at him. You and Crane have started saying the same things. He's good at what he does, Nathaniel said. It rubs off. They reached the cabin step. She turned to face him in the late afternoon light, and he was looking at her with the expression she had catalogued over months, the open one, the one underneath the guarded exterior that most of Silver Creek never saw. Willis Kane came to see me this morning, he said. She waited. He wants to buy the land back, Nathaniel said, at the price Whitmore paid him, which I've agreed to hold for him at no interest over 5 years. He paused. His daughter's surgery went well. She's recovering. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, you didn't tell me you'd arranged that. The surgery, I didn't arrange it. He stopped. I sent her doctor a letter after Whitmore bought the land. Introduced him to a colleague in Helena who had experience with her condition. The colleague offered to perform the surgery at a reduced rate. He said it the way he said most things he'd done quietly, factually, without looking for credit. Willis didn't know until afterward. She looked at him. You did that while you were dealing with the boundary case and the inquiry and everything else, she said. It took one letter. Nathaniel. He met her eyes. Don't make it small, she said quietly. You wrote a letter that got a girl her surgery. Don't make it small by calling it one letter. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Good, she said. And then, because she was Clara, and she believed in following one true thing with another, the 3 sentences in your letter. I've read them 8 times. Something moved through his face. And they get better each time, she said, which is not something I expected from a man who claims to say things plainly. He looked at her with an expression that was unguarded in a way she was still getting used to, because it was the expression of a man who has been held carefully at a distance from his own feelings for a long time and is finding that the distance has closed. I meant every word, he said. I know, she said. That's what makes them better each time. The school board met on the 3rd Tuesday of November, as it always did, and this time Clara attended. Not as the subject of the meeting, as a witness to it. The 3 remaining board members, Bickle Francis Abernethy, and a newcomer named Hartwell, who had been appointed to fill the vacancy left by Marsh's resignation, sat across the table with the collective energy of people who are aware they made a significant error and are determined to correct it without appearing to fully acknowledge the error. Bickle spoke first. He cleared his throat twice, which Clara had learned was his preparatory ritual for saying things he found uncomfortable. The board would like to formally reinstate your position, he said. Full salary, retroactive to the date of suspension. Another throat clearing. And we'd like to address the previous salary reduction, which the board has determined was not properly supported by the evidence available at the time. You're reversing the 15% cut, Clara said. We are. And restoring back pay for the suspension period. Yes. She looked at him steadily. I'd like something else. Bickle glanced at Abernethy, who looked at Hartwell, who had the useful quality of not yet having formed strong opinions about anything. The 2 students whose fees I waived, Clara said. I'd like the board to formalize a need-based fee waiver program. So it's not at my discretion, so it's a board policy. Any family that can document financial need gets the waiver without having to ask me personally. She paused. Asking is hard for people. Making it a policy removes the asking. Bickle looked at the table. That would require a budget adjustment, he said, by approximately $12 per year at current enrollment. Clara said. "I've done the arithmetic. I can show you if it would help." A pause. "I don't think that will be necessary," Hartwell said, with the slightly surprised decisiveness of someone who has just realized they have the casting vote on something and has decided to use it in the obvious direction. "I think the program makes sense. I'll second it." Francis Abernethy, who had run Abernethy's General Store for 20 years and understood that some negotiations end faster when you let the reasonable side win, said, "So moved." Bickle looked at the two of them and understood that he was outvoted before the vote happened. "Fine," he said. "We'll document it in the minutes." "Thank you," Clara said. "I'd like a copy." Bickle made a sound that was not quite a sigh. "Of course you would," he said, and it was almost fond. She walked out of that meeting into the cold evening air and stood on the step for a moment. She had her position back. She had back pay. She had a board policy that meant the children whose families couldn't afford the fee would never have to watch their parents navigate the embarrassment of asking for something directly. She had fought for every piece of it and won every piece of it, and she let herself feel that, let herself feel the full weight of it, which she didn't always do because she had a habit of moving directly to the next thing before she'd absorbed the current thing. Not tonight. Tonight she stood in the cold for 2 full minutes and felt what it felt like to win. Then she went home and made supper and graded 11 days of missed work because 31 students did not stop needing their education while their teacher stood on steps feeling things. The twist that no one in Silver Creek had anticipated arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the hearing, in the form of a letter from the territorial governor's office. Crane brought it to Nathaniel in the morning and watched him read it with the expression of a man who has already read it and is interested in the recipient's reaction. Nathaniel read it twice. "They want to appoint me to the Territorial Land Commission," he said, "to fill the vacancy created by the removal of Whitmore's appointees," Crane said. "Yes. I'm a rancher, not a commissioner. You're a rancher who just demonstrated more understanding of territorial land law and documentation standards than most of the people currently on that commission." Crane paused. "The governor's office is aware that the Whitmore fraud was facilitated in part by commission appointments that prioritized social connection over competence. They're trying to correct that." He paused again. "They specifically cited the way you handled the fraud evidence, the decision not to settle, the careful sequencing of the inquiry, the choice to go to Helena correctly rather than politically." He met Nathaniel's eyes. "They cited your approach, Nathaniel, not your land." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. "It's a 3-year term," he said. "I'd have to be in Helena 4 times a year for hearings." "Yes. That's 4 weeks away from the ranch per year roughly." "Roughly." He was quiet for a long time. Crane waited with the patience of a man who had learned that Nathaniel's silences were working time, not stalling. "I need to talk to Clara," Nathaniel said. Crane permitted himself a very small smile. "I thought you might say that." He rode east. She was between students when he arrived. 2 of the older children had stayed for additional arithmetic help, and he waited outside until he heard the session end and the children leave. Then he knocked. She read the letter at the kitchen table, while he sat across from her. She read it once quickly, then again slowly. Then she set it down and looked at him. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I want to know what you think," he said. "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "I think the commission needs people who understand what bad land governance costs the people it's supposed to protect. I've just watched it firsthand. Willis Kane sold land he'd built over 20 years because a gap in county records gave a fraudulent claim enough cover to survive. That's a system problem." He paused. "I think I could do something about that from inside the commission." "You could," she said. "But 4 weeks a year in Helena is 4 weeks away from—" He stopped. "From what?" she said quietly. "From here," he said. "From what I'm building here." She looked at him steadily, and he could see her turning something over, not deciding whether he should do it, but something else, something she was deciding how to say. "Nathaniel," she said, "if you turn this down because of me, because of us, I will be angry with you." He blinked. "Clara, I mean it." Her voice was level and clear. "I did not spend 11 days teaching without pay and walk into a territorial hearing and sit in that second row for you to make yourself smaller because you're worried about 4 weeks a year in Helena." She held his eyes. "The school runs while I'm here. The ranch runs while John Petty is here. And Helena is 3 days by stage, not the other side of the world." "You'd be all right," he said carefully, "with the absences." "I'd be annoyed," she said frankly. "I'd probably write you letters telling you what's wrong with the commission's filing systems. I'd likely have opinions about every decision they make that you'd be obligated to relay." She paused. "But I'd be all right, because you'd come back." He looked at her, and, she added with the particular directness that was so entirely herself, "If I ever come to Helena with you, I'd like to visit the Territorial Library. Their land documentation archive is apparently significant." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'd come to Helena?" "Occasionally." She met his eyes. "If invited." He felt the corner of his mouth move. "Consider yourself invited." "Good," she said. "Then write back and accept. And tell them you'll want access to their historical survey records as part of the appointment, because there are probably other documentation gaps in other counties, and someone should be looking at them." She paused. "I can help you draft the letter if you'd like." He looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who had just told him to take a territorial appointment and then immediately begun improving his acceptance terms, and felt something so uncomplicated and certain that he almost didn't recognize it at first, because it had been so long since he'd felt anything this clean. "Clara," he said. "What?" "I'm going to marry you," he said. "I know I asked in a letter and you said yes, but I want to say it out loud to your face so we're both clear." She looked at him. "We're clear," she said, and the smile came the real one, full and unguarded. The one that made her look like herself in the way that people only look like themselves when they've stopped managing how they appear. "Now write the letter." They were married in December on a Saturday in the small church at the center of Silver Creek. Clara wore her best dress, which was not the blue cotton one, but a deep green wool she had made herself in the 3 weeks between the hearing and the wedding, because she had decided that she was allowed to have something made for the occasion, rather than wearing what she already owned. And this decision had cost her a small internal argument that she eventually won by reminding herself that she had just negotiated a board policy for a fee waiver program and could certainly allow herself a new dress. Nathaniel wore his dark wool jacket, the one from the harvest gathering, newly pressed. The church was full in the way that Silver Creek churches fill for events that mean something not just the prominent families in the front rows, but the parents of her students, Willis Kane, with his daughter, who had made the trip from their South Line property and who was thinner than she'd been before the surgery, but walking and color in her face. Ruth, who cried from the opening prayer and did not apologize for it. Thomas Merritt, who had ridden from Billings because Crane had sent him an invitation, and he had decided that closing the chapter properly required being present for what the chapter had made possible. John Petty stood up with Nathaniel. Clara stood with no one, because she had thought about it and decided she didn't need someone to stand beside her to get through a ceremony, and also because the person she most wanted beside her was standing at the front of the church, waiting for her to walk to him. She walked herself. She walked the length of that church aisle alone in her green wool dress, and she held her own flowers, and she kept her chin level and her pace steady, and she heard the room shift the way rooms shift when they're watching something that matters, and she did not look at anyone except the man at the end of the aisle. Nathaniel watched her come. He had watched a lot of things over the past year. He had watched the territorial inquiry proceed through its stages. He had watched Willis Kane regain his land and begin rebuilding his South herd. He had watched Silver Creek reassemble its understanding of itself around the facts that the hearing had established, watched it slowly become a place where Marsh's name was said with particular flatness and Clara Bennett's with particular warmth. He had watched a lot of things. None of them had prepared him for watching Clara walk toward him down the center of a church on a December morning, carrying her own flowers, not needing anyone to hold her steady, choosing to walk to him anyway. He made himself breathe. She reached him. "You came," he said quietly below the minister's hearing. "I told you I would," she said. "I know." "Then stop looking surprised," she said. But her eyes were bright again, the way they'd been when she read the letter outside the marshal's office. Bright in the specific way that meant she was in the grip of something real and had given up trying not to show it. The minister said the words that ministers say. When it came time for Nathaniel to speak his, he said them the way he said the things that mattered plainly directly without reaching for decoration. When it came time for Clara to speak hers, she said them in a voice that was steady and clear and did not waver, and she looked at him while she said them the way she looked at everything that deserved her full attention. Then it was done. He held out his hand. She took it. The reception was at the ranch house which John Petty and 3 of the hands had spent 2 days preparing, and which Clara had walked through that morning, and then quietly rearranged in 3 key respects which Nathaniel had watched without comment, because he was learning that living with Clara meant that things would periodically be rearranged in key respects and would be better for it. Victoria Hale came to the reception. She came alone, and she stayed an hour, and she shook Nathaniel's hand, and then she took Clara's hand in both of hers and said simply, "I owe you an apology for the school board. I was in a position to say something earlier, and I didn't. I'm sorry for that." Clara looked at her. "You testified at the hearing," Clara said. "That was late." "It was when you were ready," Clara said. "That's when people should do things." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the particular expression of a woman who has just heard herself given more grace than she'd expected. "Thank you." "Thank you for coming," Clara said, and meant it. Willis Kane found Nathaniel near the end of the afternoon when the crowd had thinned and the musicians had shifted to quieter pieces. "Good woman," Willis said. It was not small talk. He was looking at Clara across the room where she was crouched at eye level with his daughter, explaining something with her hands, and his daughter was laughing. "I know it," Nathaniel said. "She'll keep you honest." "She already does." Willis looked at him. "My daughter asked me last week who her teacher is. I told her she's the school teacher's wife now. My daughter said—" Willis paused and the corner of his mouth moved. "She was always the school teacher. The other part just happened." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter is correct," he said. Willis nodded once slowly and moved away, and Nathaniel watched Clara across the room. Clara, who had been a schoolteacher before she was anything else, and would be one after all. The rest had settled, who had walked herself down the aisle and said her own words, and who was currently making a rancher's daughter laugh at something about arithmetic, and felt a thing so solid and specific that it needed no particular name. He crossed the room. Clara looked up as he approached, said something concluding to the girl who ran off toward her father, and straightened to face him. "Willis's daughter is delightful," she said. "Willis's daughter said you were always the school teacher and my part just happened." Clara considered this. "She's not wrong." "I know," he said. "It's one of the things I like about her." She looked at him. "She's going to be remarkable." "She has a good teacher," he said. Clara looked at him with the expression he had learned over months, the one that was not quite a smile, but held everything a smile holds, and then it became a full smile, real and unguarded, and he thought that he could spend the rest of his life finding reasons to see that smile, and never consider the time wasted. "You're going to write back to the governor's office tomorrow," she said. "I was going to do it Monday." "Tomorrow," she said. "The sooner they know, the sooner they can prepare the documentation. And I want to look at the appointment terms before you sign them." "You want to look at my appointment terms," he said. "You negotiated a land boundary case and a fraud inquiry. Appointment documents are different. I've read the territorial code." She paused. "The commission has a provision for associate advisors. I believe that falls under my area of competence." He looked at her. "Are you proposing to advise the Territorial Land Commission?" he said. I'm proposing to advise you, she said. What you do with the advice is your business. He was quiet for a moment. Clara, he said. What? You know this is going to make a great deal of work for both of us. Good work, she said. The kind that matters. She held his gaze. That's what you told Willis. That you were fighting because you could see what bad governance cost the people it was supposed to protect. She paused. So was I. We were just fighting from different directions. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside Silver Creek was doing what it always did in December, cold and dark, and getting on with itself the way places get on with themselves when enough time has passed and enough of the right things have been decided. I chose well, he said quietly. At the harvest gathering, walking across that room. You did, she said without false modesty, because she was not a woman who performed humility when honesty was better. So did I, when I stayed. He offered her his hand. She took it the way she'd been taking it since the church, completely without reservation, with the particular certainty of a person who has decided and does not revisit decisions that were made correctly. Let's go home, she said. And Nathaniel Brooks, who had spent 4 years building something that had no one worth coming home to, walked out of his own ranch house into the cold December night, beside the woman who had made him understand the difference between a life that looked right and a life that was and knew, with the deep and unshakable certainty of a man who has finally found solid ground that he would never confuse the two again. Some people spend a lifetime waiting to be chosen. Clara Bennett had spent hers learning to stand on her own, and that was exactly what made her worth choosing. And Nathaniel Brooks, the wealthiest man in Silver Creek, had walked across a crowded room and told the truth out loud to everyone who was watching. The woman the world had overlooked was the one who had changed everything.